Hey guys, welcome to the Analytics Live. If someone could just let me know if you hear me okay, we will go ahead and get started. Actually, I am just going to dive in. Hopefully someone will let me know if there's an issue with sound. So tonight, a couple of things. One, this is going to be my last YouTube live, at least until the trial. And you guys hear me great. So I promised myself when the kids were found that I would give myself until the end of the year. And so I kind of gave myself a deadline because I could continue jumping through these rabbit holes, you know, ad infinitum. But I need to regroup and kind of take a step back from everything and give myself a chance to recalibrate and just enjoy this life leading up to the trial, because the trial is going to be a heavy lift. I can say that I am bouncing on a high note. You guys have been, many of you have been with me through the journey. You've seen me at my worst. You've seen me at my most vulnerable. And I really feel like I'm like kind of coming through all of that. And so I just want to kind of spend some time, you know, just giving myself permission to move on with my life while still, you know, carrying these victims very closely in my heart. So, but before I finished up, one thing I will say is when the trial comes around, I'll just see how I'm doing, how everything is going. I may pick up some lives like during the trial. Hopefully all the stars align. I'm able to attend the whole trial. Hopefully it's not a ridiculously long trial. I don't have unlimited time to sit in a courtroom. But if everything aligns and I'm at the trial, I decide to do some coverage of the trial because I realize not everyone is going to have 3 weeks or however long it is to just watch all of the trial news. So if I do that, then I will start a Facebook page. I'm going to distance myself from the true crime community. I have had an amazing experience in the community. I've met some of the most wonderful, beautiful people. You know, they far outshine the occasional troll that I've come across. Excuse me. And so, but I need to kind of step back from that. And so if I do cover the trial, I'll start a Facebook page. I'll announce it on my, you know, Facebook and Twitter accounts, and I'll do it that way. So, but if murder charges are added, and I suspect they will be, the trial could get pushed out even farther. So, all right, without further ado, tonight we are going to talk about Melanie Gibb. So I know that this is a red hot topic for many. I know that a lot of people have understandably felt a lot of empathy for Melanie because in many respects, Melanie was a victim of Lori's as well. Yeah, as well as some of the other victims. What makes Melanie different from the other victims is that I personally believe that she did have some complicity. So I'm not saying that she knew where the kids were. I'm not conflating this. But what I'm going to do in this live is I am going to go chronologically through the account, through the interactions Melanie had with Lori, some of the concerns I have with her testimonies, her interviews. I'm not out for blood. I'm not trying to be cruel or unfair to Melanie. I think I've shown that I can like put on my reporter hat and try to be dispassionate and fair to all of the players. because I want to get to the truth here. So any of these individual events, and I did have to pare it down. There were more than 13 times that I feel like Melanie enabled Lori in her, murderous rampage. But I'm going to go chronologically through the list. Any of these individually, most of them, they're not, like, there's no smoking gun. Individually, they're not that significant. Some of them really are, even individually. Even if it was the only thing Melanie had done, I would have had serious issues with Melanie Gibb. But what I think that you'll see by the end is a cumulative effect of, if you look at Lori and look at how the sociopath that she was, you will see how in many ways Melanie did enable her to keep going. So without further ado, I am going to share my screen and we will jump in. Okay. Okay, the first thing to talk, whoops, let me go back here. The first thing I want to talk about here is with Lori. Lori was very much an extrovert. And as an extrovert, in just a second, I am going to take myself off the screen just because sometimes the screenshots, I didn't realize I was still in the screen. But I just want to give maximum screen real estate here. Okay, so Lori, as I was saying, Lori is an introvert. Is an extrovert, excuse me. And so she really feeds off of the energy of people around her. And she needs continual positive feedback. She really craves that. I am also slightly more extroverted than introverted in that I get energy from being around people. I just don't want them all up in my business. But Lori was much, much more extroverted. And she's the kind of person who, even as she's talking, and we've seen this in the Gilbert police interview, we saw this a little bit in the Chandler, the brief body cam video. But she gauges people as she's talking to them. So she is constantly trying to read the energy of the person, and I don't mean that in a weird J-Ro sense. I mean, just trying to read the room without being very aware, because there are times where she really misreads people. And that happened in one of our exchanges, and it was really the death blow to our relationship. So she certainly oversteps and she overestimates herself. But one of the things that I noticed in the recording that Lori made, where she gave her testimony, where she talked about wanting to murder my brother, is I noted how she started off her talk. So Melanie was by her side, and she asked Lori to introduce herself. And this is how Lori introduced herself. She said, "I feel like I love Melanie. I just love her. I saw her that we were sisters eternally, and I was sent to her." That is I bolded that because that is a classic Lori line, just giving herself airs. She didn't just meet a friend. She was sent by God to Melanie. I prayed for her and who the Father wanted me to go to. She didn't speak very eloquently, to elevate. It is so beautiful. Now, Lori said this within a week of meeting Melanie Gibb, and that will take us into our first point. So I use MG in these individual bullet points only because I'm not trying to in any way dehumanize her. I was just trying to keep the titles as short as possible. And then I wanted to be consistent. So you'll see MG, but I'm not trying to in any way like suggest anything other than, just trying to make it as clean as possible. But Melanie gave Lori a platform the week that they met. So if you know anything about me, I have been following timelines. So if I hear a date, I note it. And then I'm looking for relationships between different events. Now, Melanie recorded Lori's testimony on October 19th, 2018. This was 6 months after Joe died. And then just for perspective, Lori met Chad, according to Melanie under oath, on October 26, 2018. So it was exactly a week later. And we'll see in this video when Melanie says she actually met Lori.
At some point you met Lori Vallow, is that correct?
Correct.
And when was that?
October 2018.
Did you chat to Eval at the same time?
No.
That's a different occasion. Where did you meet Mr. Vallow?
In Mesa, Arizona, at a church building.
Okay, and what was the nature of the meeting that you were at? Heritage Camp again?
No, it was held by the church, inside the church, about preparedness type of classes that they asked me to speak on.
Okay. This was the church that was supporting this preparedness situation was part of the LDS church, is that correct?
Yes, but these groups are separate.
I'm sorry, say that again?
These groups are not affiliated with each other.
Okay. But it was at an LDS church, it was an LDS sponsored event, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Was Mr. Daybell there?
No.
So what we learned in this video was that Melanie said that she met Lori a couple weeks before this event where Lori met Chad. So, calculating everything, it was within a couple weeks. And so that means that Lori and Melanie met a week or less before Melanie gave Lori this platform to share this ridiculously crazy testimony where, and I'm not going to play the audio. You can find that on the East Idaho News site. You can actually listen to the full audio if you want, which I think was like 44 minutes. But I mean, it was a really, not even just the part about her wanting to murder my brother and her telling a bishop, that he needed to give her a temple recommend, or, it was basically a temple recommend or murder. So it was crazy. And Melanie was encouraging her throughout this testimony. And this was within a week of meeting. And so to be fair, I do think that Jason Mow played a role in this, because there's an audio recording of Jason Mow doing a podcast with Lori and Melanie. And one of the things that he said in that podcast is he said, I knew right away I had to get you, speaking to Lori, in touch with Melanie. So I think that Jason validated Lori and gave her a high recommendation and kind of passed her off to Melanie. And if you listen to that recording, and I cover it in one of my other lives, that also is just really crazy. Like Jason and Lori were talking about how like they met in the temple, and Lori says that, God sent her to the temple that day and told her that someone would have a message for her. So they both treated this meeting like it was, just some really holy convocation. And so I think that euphoria and that sense of, religious zeal kind of carried over. And so I'm not sure how much of an opportunity Melanie had with her personality to kind of put a gauge on things. However, there's only so far I can go with that in terms of, being maybe under the influence of Jason Mow or something, because you can't sit and listen to the testimony that Lori shared and not have red flags. Okay. Taking it a step further, I felt like Melanie actually lent credibility to Lori's insane testimony in this one statement she made. We'll listen to that.
You do not have any idea what is in store for you. The things are so magnificent that you can't even imagine them right now.
Right. That's why you don't need to worry.
And you don't need to worry because it's going to be glorious. And those who go to the other side wanted to go to the other side. It was their mission.
Okay, I'm going to stop it right there, and I'll go back up. It looks like it advanced me. So notice how Lori said those who go to the other side wanted to go to the other side. That is actually key. And I'm not going to make this full screen so that I can easily pause and unpause, because I'm going to, with some of these videos, I'm going to stop and kind of make notes here.
That's why you don't need to worry.
And you don't need to worry because it's going to be glorious. And those who go to the other side wanted to go to the other side. It was their mission. They chose. Everybody chose. If you have your whole, you're going to be the only one left of your whole family. That's okay.
Okay. Did everyone catch that? Lori said, if you're going to be the only one left of your whole family, that's okay. No, that is not okay. But when I listened to this again in preparing for this podcast, I just thought, wow, this sounds like premeditation. This sounds like there is a very strong possibility that at this time, she was already planning to be the only one left in her whole family.
You're here to do your mission because your kids are adults in eternity.
Okay, so why is she making this point that your kids are adults in eternity? I personally believe that it's very feasible that this is how she was justifying potentially murdering her children. Because one, she says, hey, if someone goes to the other side, so basically if you die, it's because you chose that. It was actually your mission. So she removes herself from any sense of responsibility and extends that even to children. And she's saying, well, on the other side, children are adults. And so basically it doesn't matter. It's okay that if they are murdered. That's what I think she's building up to. That's what I think, because Lori is so extroverted and she thinks out loud, she processes out loud, she has no filter. We saw that even in the Gilbert police interview. I mean, she goes in there and she starts confessing all kinds of things. Like you see Tylee have to stop her because she was admitting to really damning things because she has no filter. She gets in this manic state and she just keeps going. So I think once she starts getting in that manic state, she starts revealing just how murderous her heart is. And I only use that weird term because she said she does not have a murderous heart.
They're your friends.
Yep.
Your parents are your friends.
Yep.
They're not your kids. They're loaned to you for this short time. They're adults and they have their own missions and their own eternity to live.
Yeah.
And they're making their choices now. And who knows what they're doing. But the atonement is infinite and eternal. And we do not need to worry about the souls of men.
We do not have to worry about the souls of men. I mean, I just think that I'm not saying that Melanie should have been able to foresee the trajectory that Lori was headed on. That's not at all what I'm suggesting here. Now, eventually, I do feel like, 4 or 5 murders and deaths, disappearances, yeah, she should have figured it out. But at this point, I'm not in any way suggesting that she should have known that in this testimony, this is what Lori was saying she wanted to do. This is definitely a case of hindsight is 2020. I think it's incredibly compelling now to hear her talk so openly, so freely, because at this point, it was 6 months after Joe's death. We don't know if it was murder. He could have died of a heart attack. We really don't know. But the thing I've been requesting is that they actually do an investigation. We'll see if that happens. I don't have a whole lot of confidence in any Arizona law enforcement. But that said, I do think that in retrospect, what she's saying is incredibly telling.
We do not have to worry about our children. We do
That
not
gives you
have
hope.
to
You should have
worry.
incredible hope to hear that.
Okay, so that's what I mean by Melanie lent credibility to Lori's testimony and to the insanity of what she was saying. Even before, all of this stuff aside, just she had already shared her testimony about wanting to murder Joe. She had given scriptural support for it, so it built up to this point. This isn't early on in her testimony. So you see Melanie stepping in and telling people, you can see she is definitely the leader in that room. And she lends this credibility. One, by giving her this platform in the first place with knowing so little about her, but then for some reason, she felt compelled. Maybe some people looked incredulous. I don't know. But you hear her say, this should give you hope. It does not. Okay, moving on. Oops. I'm getting some lag here because of the...
Some point,
And it backed up.
You do not have any idea.
Okay. Secondly, I believe that Melanie introduced Chad and Lori, and I'll make the case for it. So Melanie told Nate Eaton, as we'll hear in this clip, that she didn't remember if she was there when Lori and Chad met. And I don't remember if I need to pause this. So I'm going to just go ahead and keep it smaller. They're just talking heads.
And at what point did she meet Chad? Because you knew Chad and you knew Lori, but they were separate relationships.
Correct. So I met her first. Well, I met him, within years, but didn't know him super close or anything like that. So then I meet her, and then her and I decided that we're going to go to an event in St. George. And so we drove down together, and then he was selling his books and speaking. And so that's when they got to meet. So that was probably October, November, somewhere.
Take note of her reference to him selling his books, because that will come up later.
In that time frame of the same year.
2018.
Mhm.
So did you introduce them?
I don't know if I did or she just went up to the table. I can't recall.
And was
Okay, I'm going to call BS on this. And this is a consistent pattern with Melanie. And this is one of the frustrating things for me about Melanie in these interviews, as well as in her testimonies. She has this tendency. She does not want to be tied down to dates. And so you hear and details. And so she will frequently say, oh, I don't recall. I don't remember. She'll give really broad date ranges. When Nate asked her when she last saw Tylee, she said July or August. And I'm like, oh, come on, that's ridiculous. You can't narrow it down. And so some people have defended her, saying, well, that's quite a while. It's been quite a while. However, you have to keep in mind that when she got that call on November 26th from Chad and then from Lori to not pick up the phone because Rexburg police was going to be calling. That was a significant point in time. And that was close to all of these events happening. And when something like that happens, it's just human nature, it's natural tendency to replay those videos because you're trying to figure out what the hell happened, and she also had a partner. She had a boyfriend who was going through this stuff with her. So she would have been talking with him. She would have been talking with other members. We know that she had an ex parte conversation with Alex, which may have actually gotten him killed. We don't know, but there would have been a lot of chatter about this, a lot of rehearsing, what happened, how things went down. So I am just not inclined to believe when she has these kind of general statements, like, I don't recall if I introduced them or if she just walked up to his book table. Well, I take issue with that just because this was such a momentous occasion. Lori had already met with Jason Mow. He was all amped up. Then Melanie, I actually question if part of the reason Melanie recorded her testimony was to be able to pass on to the guys, to Jason Mow and to Chad, for them to be able to listen to her testimony. So this was almost like an audition tape for Lori for this group, and so, this was, then a week later, she meets Chad and Melanie is like, you know what? It was just so insignificant. I'm not really sure. So when I heard that initially, I was like, this sounds like she's trying to distance herself. She feels shame over them meeting. They were two married people, and Melanie, in the midst of all of this, published a book. We'll talk a little bit about that later on, but this was a religious book. She talks about having this mighty change of heart. I do believe that there is an incredible level of sincerity in, in her faith, in wanting to please, whatever deity she believes in, or deities, so I do detect a level of sincerity with her. And yet it's incongruous. Like, well, why would you be playing this role in putting together two people who were married to other people? And then you have this other dynamic going on at the same time of Charles being identified as a zombie. Well, that comes a little bit later. But anyway, so, okay, moving on. We're going to listen to more of it.
There anything unusual or magical or different about when they met?
So we were there for 2 or 3 days, and I think he was there for 2 days. And she talked to him a lot about his books. And so she asked a lot of questions, and she was very interested in what he thought, and she was interested in what she knew. And so they just started talking about these different beliefs that generally are not something you learn in church. And so they started kind of develop that connection right there. Mm-hmm.
And were you kind of intergrained with all of it right there as they're talking about these things?
I am going in and out, and I'm not sure exactly all the things they're saying.
I see.
Yeah.
But it wasn't anything unusual. It would be if you found somebody at the church that had similar beliefs and you were talking about things, or was it a step further?
It was a step further. It was discussing the things that were not something you would talk at church. It was something that you would talk closely with not a lot of people listening.
Did you know that Chad had a wife and 5 kids in Rexburg?
Mm-hmm.
And did Lori know that?
Yes.
And was Tammy ever with Chad?
No.
She didn't come with him to the events?
No.
And did his children?
Not that I know of.
Okay. So where did their relationship go from there?
So after spending much time talking those 2 days, we went back to Arizona, and he came down to Arizona when it was the next event, which was in November sometime. And so many people, so some of my friends, some of Lori's friends, and then Chad, all got to stay in her house. It was one of the larger houses she had, so she had plenty of room throughout her house. And so They spend some time talking, and he spends some time talking to us as well.
Everybody stayed in this house.
That's right.
Chad, Lori, you. Was Charles there?
No, he went out of town.
He was out of town.
Mhm.
So he wasn't there at the house the day that you guys were all there for that conference.
Right.
The conference happens, and what happens from there with Chad and Lori?
By the way, this conference took place November 16th to November 17th. This was in Mesa, Arizona. One thing I will note, excuse me, is that Chad had emailed Lori that bizarre breakdown of light and dark ratings for her family members 2 weeks before this conference. So they met on October 26th. Now, I suspect they probably had been communicating back and forth, at least over email. There is a claim that they had some meetup in a temple. Hopefully Melanie hasn't perjured herself. And so I have a little bit of some doubts about that until something comes along to corroborate that. But we know that they met on the 26th, and then it was just 4 days later that he sent Lori the breakdown of the light and dark ratings and rated Tylee a 4.3, I think 2D, so D for dark. And then it was just a couple weeks and a couple days later that he was actually staying with Lori. Now, one question mark I have is, where were Tylee and JJ? Because Charles was out of town, and there's no one has ever said like where the kids were. So I don't know if they were staying with family members or if Tylee was watching JJ alone at Alex's. I don't know. But it was a couple weeks later that they were all staying in this house together. Now, one other thing that I will note here is that clearly this was Melanie's choice to stay here. Chad was coming in from out of town. Melanie lived in the area, so she could have just been in her home and traveled to the conference. So this was, very much like kind of a freaky friends get together here. I'm referencing Friends, the TV show. But so she, this was one more way that she plugged into this. She, where you would think that, like I haven't written any kind of, religious book. I didn't, at this point, neither had she, but, she looks for these platforms. She has these meetings, and yet, here she is. She's already so early on in the relationship. She is Lori's happy, like ride along as Lori and Chad start to develop this relationship while both of them have spouses. Okay.
They just spent time talking about things. They went on a walk together or jog in the morning together. I do recall that. All the things they talked about. It's like so personal. It's so hard to share with the world. You know what I mean?
So it was very personal details.
Some of it, he was teaching us about some of his understandings about multiple lives and things of that nature. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop this again. I do take issue with her saying, like kind of including herself in, one of the acolytes sitting at Chad's feet and learning from him. Excuse me. I choked on some water. We know from the Dateline producer account that Melanie had said to them in her interview that she had been following Chad since 2015 or 2016, somewhere in that range. Now, under oath, she said that she didn't meet Chad until July 2017, but she was going to these conferences, and so she was very familiar with Chad's teachings. So this would not have been like her introduction to this whole concept of multiple probations. So I'm just going to rewind it just a little bit.
Some of his understandings about multiple lives and things of that nature. But at that point, he had already shared with her when they met in St. George that they had been married multiple times before. So that was established when they first met.
Chad told Lori when they first met that they had been married before.
Not in this, right now in this earth life, but in multiple earth lives.
In a previous life.
Mm-hmm.
And did Lori have an issue with that?
No, she seemed to understand that teaching already, that she had learned already through podcasts. So it wasn't something that was
Foreign,
right?
I absolutely love Nate's expression when he asked that question. It's the only time in the interview he breaks character, but I applaud it.
And at what point?
Okay, so by August, when she testified, so this was the second day of Chad Daybell's hearing, her memory was jogged.
And then at some point, do you have a recollection when Mr. Daybell and Lori Vallow met?
Yes,
And you were present for that meeting, is that correct?
yes,
And was that in Arizona?
no. As you recall, I said St. George, Utah.
Where was that sweet, demure Melanie? No, but to be fair, Prior, he's a tough cookie and he's an odd bird. But my sympathy for Melanie only goes so far because, she put herself in this position. But anyway, so there we find out, yes, she was there. So it's not like she was just there. And I mean, obviously the, normal thing would have been for her to introduce Chad because she had met Chad, introduced Lori to Chad. And so, that would have been a pretty straightforward question to answer. But again, her introducing Lori and Chad could have been nothing. If all of these other things wouldn't have happened, it would be like, okay, this is some dangerous territory. Having the sleepover at Lori's, yeah, that was super weird, and keep in mind at any point, Melanie could have said, you know what, this is too much. I'm going to bounce, but she doesn't. Okay.
And then at some point,
Now, this is just a little side note here, but I suspect that the other Melanie Pulowski, also met Chad in St. George at the same conference because she makes a reference to his book table. Now, in keeping with Melanie Pulowski's MO, when she doesn't want to answer a question, she just tosses word salad. I mean, she just talks and talks and talks until the interviewer is just eager to move on to the next question. And it's worked well for her. But let's see what she has to say.
How well did you know Chad? I know they maybe had met and developed a relationship over the past year and a half or so, but they got married pretty quickly, especially soon after both of their spouses had passed. How well did she know him, and how well did you guys know him?
I don't know the first time when Lori met Chad. I met Chad initially in the fall of 2018, and he was selling his books, and I met him, and he's a very quiet and humble guy.
Here's where she goes into absolutely unnecessary detail because she does not want to be asked when in the fall of 2018.
Just seemed kind of kept to himself, and I had no reason to think anything other than he's just trying to sell his books and just be a good person. And Lori and Chad had a friendship, and I don't know when they initially met. I think they shared some spiritual beliefs, or would talk about it with his books or ideas in his books. But I can't speak to, their relationship and why they got married fast. And I know Ian and I got fast, and we kind of act on faith and get our own answers of what's right for our own situations. And
Okay, so that was just to answer when she met Chad and when Lori met Chad. And even her saying, I don't know when Lori met Chad. Really? I think not. Okay, number 3. Melanie met Jason Mow before going to Gilbert Police Department. So a little bit of background. I've already talked about this in another video. Tensions were rising between Lori and Charles. The week before all of this happened, I think it was January 19th. I'll have to double check that. Chad calls Lori. Melanie was there for the call and lets her know that Charles had been overtaken by a zombie. And I think it was January. Anyway, it was mid-January. So Charles had been overtaken by a zombie. It's a very bizarre story where the zombie has a particular name. It was Nick Schneider, and this demon. I think I said zombie. This demon was violating Lori. So Lori takes off, and she's in the wind. And then in the midst of all of this, Charles goes to Texas for a business trip, and Lori just opens up a can of crazy on him and just unleashes it. And so Charles is like, one against the wind, trying to fight this, trying to get, a psych eval. He reached out to Gilbert Police Department that was spinning into the wind. Again, I did a whole video about a video and a half, another part of a video about Charles and the plight he experienced and how he was deserved both by Gilbert Police Department as well as Chandler Police Department. But in the midst of all of this craziness, so Charles comes back from Texas. April Raymond had said that Lori went with a friend and took Charles' truck from the airport garage. And so Charles didn't have a car. She had canceled his flight. When he did get home and got a ride home, all of his stuff was gone. I mean, it was just one thing after another. She drained the business account of $35,000 plus, leaving the account with less than $100. And I mean, just basically turned his world upside down. And then Charles, in looking back, I think what he was trying to do was force Gilbert Police Department's hand to serve the mandatory hold, which we later find out was a voluntary hold until she didn't show up for it. But so he, I think, was trying to force their hand, and he went into Lori's car. Her door was apparently left unlocked, and he grabbed her purse. And then he said that they could meet up at the therapist's office. And I think his plan was to have the police there ready to pick him up. And I actually, just this week in preparing for the live, I found a reference to, like, he had found out what hotel she was in by the room key that was in her purse. And he had asked a police officer with Gilbert Police Department if they could meet her at the hotel. And they said, we're not going to participate in your sting operation. So he just wasn't getting the participation that he felt like he needed. It wasn't his best move, but I do understand the desperation that he was experiencing. But this prompted Lori to then reach out to Gilbert Police Department. And there was all of this drama, and Melanie enters the scene. So before she meets Lori at Gilbert, she meets up with Jason Mow. And this is how she describes this fortuitous meeting.
So, I mean, yeah, it's a good thing you did come in because it would be a very one-sided story. So it's always good to kind of see
Yeah, we wouldn't want that.
what's going on.
What was really cool because I was sitting there in the, coming out of her neighborhood after he conned me to go to the house, and I pulled over, by that pool. And then I see this guy that I know, just like
Our good friend.
just like right in front of me on the side of the road, and I'm
Oh,
like,
wow.
that looks like Jason. I'm like, hold on, that's Jason. He's a police guy. I'm gonna go. So I'm like, Jason, what are you doing over here? He goes, I was just going to get some.
Oh, yeah.
Like, hey, I just want to tell you what's going on. He goes, yeah, go down to the police office now. I'm like, okay.
Okay, so on a total side note, my daughter and I, we quote that he's police guy all the time. Like we see, a player when we live in New York City. And so if we see someone being arrested, we're like, hey, he's police guy. Anyway, okay, moving on. So she describes this meeting as like she's driving up to Lori's and she's in the area where the neighborhood pool is. So she's close to Lori's house. And she says she just happens to see this guy along the side of the road. And then she looks closer and she sees that, oh, this is Jason Mow. Even though he didn't live in that area, that he just happened to be on the side of the road. So she pulls over and it was this, a stroke of good luck for her because then she was able to ask him what she should do. And he told her that she should go to the quote police office. But she also said in this that Charles had conned her to meet up at the house. And we'll learn a little bit more about that.
So, I mean, yeah,
So the next one, and this just ties right in. She was deceptive at Gilbert Police Department in order to vouch for Lori. Yep. Okay, here we go.
But then he started texting all my family and all my friends and impersonating me and got my friend lured over to the house to meet him, where he had kicked in the door to get into the house.
You did that this morning.
Last night.
Okay. Right. Okay.
Sorry? I'm sorry, but he texted her from my phone because he was pretending to be me, saying, "Oh, come meet me in the house," whatever.
Okay.
Oops. Oh, I don't know what happened.
You can use a Lori.
And then when you get
He said, "Can you come to the house now?"
Oh, yeah, let me back up a little bit more.
Say to you.
Come meet me in the house, whatever.
Okay. How did he? What did he say to you?
He said, "Can you come to the house now?"
And then when you get okay.
Okay, that was deceptive, I believe, because here you, and I've covered this in a different, different live, so I won't go too far into it, but you see Tylee, and I believe innocently, she's, trying to be helpful. And, Melanie just made this claim that Charles had basically commandeered Lori's cell phone and had texted Melanie and lured her to the house, making her think that this was Lori. And Tylee says, do you have the text messages on your phone? And Melanie says, I don't have them right here. So keep in mind, this exchange would have just happened that morning. So why wouldn't she have had these text messages on her phone? To me, I flag that as deception. I'm going to back it up a little bit.
So when I got there, I said, you can use a Lori's phone to connect with me because sorry, I deceived you.
Okay, I'm going to stop right there. I flagged this before. Charles didn't talk like a dork. He would have never said, sorry, I deceived you. That's just ridiculous.
luckily there were some other people there that were.
He was changing the locks and probably
The
locked the door.
locksmith.
Okay. One, her saying, luckily there were some other people there. No, take note here. They are gradually painting this picture of Charles as being volatile and dangerous. Like Melanie saying, kind of like, oh, lucky for me, there were other people there. Then Lori jumps in, and together they're talking over each other to tell the police officers that Charles had a locksmith over there because he was trying to lock Lori out. That was not the case. Lori also says that Charles kicked in the door. Charles did not kick in the door. We saw the body cam footage. He was locked out because Lori, and most likely, I believe, Melanie was the friend who most likely helped her steal Charles' car, and that plays into a statement she makes in a minute here. And so, he's trying to get into the house. No one was replying to his text messages. He tried different people many times, and no one was replying. And so he called Gilbert Police Department, and he tried to kick in the door, but as a 63-year-old man, and he was in very good, physical shape, but he couldn't kick in the door. An officer kicked in the door. So he would have had a locksmith there to repair the door.
Were there. Mm-hmm. The locksmiths were there, so I'm glad that they were there. But there was a white Suburban,
Okay, the white Suburban. Again, this is deceptive on Melanie's part. She's like, and then there was a white Suburban. I don't know what was up with that. Well, she did know what was up with that because again, I believe that she was most likely the friend who helped Lori move Charles' car. And so she would have known that he wouldn't have had his normal car. And so it would have been within the realm of possibility. It wouldn't have been very difficult for her to figure out, oh, you know what? He probably had to go and get a rental car because Lori wasn't returning the car. And in fact, she did not return the car for 3 days. Okay, back up a little bit. Oops. Shoot. It's because I embedded these videos into the Google Slides. So.
What was he calling you there for? So you got to the house.
Okay, let me back up.
I didn't know, I suspected it would be her. I should have noticed it.
Okay, what kind of car do you drive?
An Infinity.
So you got to the house, and then you got there. He said, "Yeah, I deceived you."
Yeah,
What
so
was he
I
calling
said,
you there for?
He wanted me to come over there and get some information about her.
Oh, okay. What did he ask you?
He was asking like, what's running to her, like,
Where is she?
Where is she? Of course, I didn't say where she. I didn't know where she was.
I didn't tell anybody.
She didn't
I'll
tell
tell her
me.
out because I just thought it was safe.
Again, I can't prove it. I doubt she didn't know where Lori was. We know from Dateline, again, the Dateline producer account that they had, I think it was, I forget how many burner phones, 60 maybe, and 30 email addresses. They had plenty of ways to contact each other.
Safer for everybody.
Yeah. Especially wanted me to take a side of things.
Tell her how crazy I was and why I'm like that.
What was your name?
No.
Your last name?
GIBB.
Okay. Just because for documentation later. What's your date of birth? So he had you come there, was asking you questions. So, like, is this something that's happened before, or is this like?
Unfortunately, yeah. Like, you go to hotels just to like calm down or something.
What is it like that motivates him doing this kind of stuff? Did he say one? Good
This
enough.
time I caught him cheating and I had evidence and I told him about it. He travels a lot for business, so I told him about it, told him not to come home and that his stuff would be gone and that his car would be gone and it was, so he's a little mad. She's just trying to protect herself.
And there we go, another enabling behavior. Here, Lori goes crazy, admits all of this stuff. Like, why does she need to take all of his stuff and his car and money and all of that? That has nothing to do with protecting herself. But Melanie steps in and, Melanie's reading the temperature of the room. She's reading the risk that Lori just took. And she balances it out and says she's just trying to protect herself.
But I just left with the kids because I didn't want them in all the drama. Yeah.
So then you took your phone and purse and had.
Yeah, so considerate. Okay. Next up, I believe Melanie helped Lori evade the psych eval. I will make a case for that. So Melanie said in her interview with Nate Eaton that she went with Lori to the psych eval, and this is what they told her.
She tells him, he becomes worried, actually goes before a court and says she needs to have a mental, psychological evaluation.
Correct.
Did you go with her to that evaluation?
I did.
And what was that like?
They received her and she said, oh, she passed with flying colors and she got out quickly. And I waited on the outside for her, and then Tylee is actually the one that picked us up from there.
And when you say passed with flying colors, do you know what they did? Was it just an exam where she filled out a questionnaire or she met with a doctor?
They went in the back room and they just talked to her about all kinds of stuff and asked her all kinds of questions. She didn't tell me in detail all the things I probably didn't want to know, but
that's also a theme I probably didn't want to know. I'm not covering this particular detail in this video, but I'm not going into detail. But at one point, Melanie said that she asked Alex, "Do I want to know where JJ is?" So it's this undercurrent of like she seems to think she's not culpable because she didn't ask any questions. Whoops. Oh, come on.
the questions she went in the back room and they just talked to her about all kinds of stuff and asked her all kinds of questions. She didn't tell me in detail all the things I probably didn't want to know, but she seemed that she wasn't evaluated as mentally ill. So they said that she's like, oh, you're fine. We know that you're not mentally ill. I mean, that's what she told me that they said to her. So
do you think she was honest with them in her religious beliefs, or did she lie and give them the answers they wanted to hear?
I don't know. I don't know what they asked her. I should have asked her that, but I didn't.
So she gets out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And is that when the whole incident with her purse happened?
Shortly after.
Okay. So yeah, you should have asked her. I mean, I don't believe any of this. I don't believe that they even went to community bridges. And I'll make a case for that in the next slide. But one thing I want to note here is, again, like it just doesn't make sense. Here, one, why is she even going with Lori to the psych eval? Why are they why would they be dragging Tylee around? It doesn't make sense. And a psych eval, it's not like she's just going to sit outside and wait for Lori to get out, as if like Lori's going to an orthodontist appointment or something, and Melanie's like the mom waiting for her in the parking lot. And and then Melanie describes a scenario where Tylee drops them off and then she takes off and then she comes back and picks them up. It just, it doesn't make sense. But also at the very end, Melanie got the timing wrong about the purse incident. So she said that the purse incident happened after Lori went for the psych eval. Well, if you're at all familiar with the purse incident, Lori was dropping JJ off at school. So this would have been maybe, sometime between 7 and 8 in the morning. This psych eval would have had to be at dark 30. But also it doesn't make sense because Lori found out at Gilbert Police Department, which she went to Gilbert Police Department because Charles took her purse. That's where she found out about the psych eval and the mandatory hold. So you even see Lori is like baffled, and she even says, "How did he even know to do this?" And so, but one thing that I think is interesting with this is one time I was watching a true crime episode, and the person, was a member of law enforcement. They talked about how much easier it is to recount events than it is to memorize facts and memorize a timeline. So when you're being honest, you can replay a video in your head. And that doesn't mean that a person has no chance of, getting details wrong. We all do. But that was a pretty big juxtaposition, and so it just it makes me all the more suspicious that she's memorizing facts. She's not recounting events. Okay.
He tells him.
All right. So this was a snippet from the divorce filings that Charles had filed. And it says here, father has attempted to get mother some help, but she refuses to visit a doctor because, quote, they would discover that she is a translated being. Around the same time, the order of protection was issued. Father filled out a petition with Community Bridges. So this is where Lori was supposed to have the psych eval for a voluntary 72-hour hold and evaluation. So she was supposed to go in there for 3 days. Father told mother when she needed to appear at Community Bridges, but she never showed. Community Bridges then informed father that based on the information he provided them, they would be issuing an involuntary 72-hour hold petition to Gilbert Police, instructing the police department to take mother into custody and transport her to Community Bridges if she made any contact with the police. Well, I think law enforcement needs to tighten this down a little bit, quite a bit actually. If a situation like this has escalated to the point and there's been stratagem involved and the person hasn't shown up for a voluntary hold and another petition is drawn to make it an involuntary hold, I don't think it should be like, oh, and if you just happen to run into her, go ahead and bring her in. We also know from the interview with Gilbert Police Department that, I forget the officer's name now, but the older officer on 9 different times in that meeting gave her tips on how to evade a psych eval, going so far as to say, if they knock on your door, don't open the door. As long as there's a barrier between you and the police, they're not going to kick in the door. He kept re-emphasizing that they weren't going to kick in the door. And another time he said, I don't know how we're going to make this go away. So you see this officer, and but really both of them, at least one was a rookie. I mean, he is fresh out of the academy, so I give him a pass. But the older officer, he wasn't fresh out of the academy. He gets no pass in my book. But they both so clearly developed this emotional attachment to Lori. She played the part of the femme fatale, and they just ate it up. And as I've said before, they were intoxicated by her siren song. And so, it impacted him to the point where he's on the same side of the table as Lori and working against Charles and saying, I don't know how we're going to make this go away. Okay. All right. The Gilbert Police report number is blah, blah, blah. To date, mother has not been taken to Community Bridges and father believes the petition may have expired. In short, Father is concerned for mother's mental and emotional health based on these recent events and comments. Clearly, mother is not in a clear mental state, and father is concerned that mother would not be able to make decisions concerning JJ. It would be in his best interest. Man, did Charles nail this one. Therefore, father requests that he be awarded sole legal decision-making on a temporary basis, with father being the primary residential parent. So this juncture here, and I've shared this in another video, I feel like there were two people, in addition to law enforcement, there were two people who were involved in this whole situation that I think could have been the heroes of this story, could have prevented all of the bloodshed from Charles on. And I think one is Gabe Bonilla. He was Charles and Lori's bishop. I talked about him in another video and the complicit role that he played in these interactions. He was deceptive. He worked against Charles. He was in a really powerful position to help Charles because Charles looped him in on one of these calls, and instead he really dismissed it, worked against him. But I think the other person was Melanie Gibb. Melanie could have been the hero of this story and said, you know what, this is, no, I'm going to make sure that Lori gets to this psych eval. But she didn't do it. I do not believe that she did that. Okay, next one. Melanie, in my opinion, asked the wrong question regarding Lori's claim that she thought Charles was going to die in a car accident. Let's listen to that.
From what I understand, Lori received a revelation that Charles was supposed to die in an accident on his way home from Texas.
Correct.
He did.
I'm going to stop it right here. This is beyond all shadow of a point, the point of no return in my mind with Melanie. This is the point where I believe she becomes complicit. Here, your friend is, she's already talked about wanting to murder her ex-husband, my brother, and Melanie knew that Joe was dead. Excuse me. And so now here we have another person who, Lori has already said, Lori and Chad have already said that Charles has been overtaken by a demon. So you can see they're setting it up. It's not murder, it's mercy. If you read Ian Pawlowski's document that explains their crazy belief system that they were all just making up as they went along, if someone is overtaken by an evil spirit, that person becomes a zombie, and the only way that they can move on to the next probation is for them to die, because then their spirit is released and they're free to move on to the next probation. And I assume unless they're sealed away, which is how Chad marked Joe. So I'm left to assume he wasn't eligible to move on to future probations. Okay, so, but once someone starts talking about, I have a revelation from God that Charles is going to die in a car accident, I 100% believe that Melanie had a moral obligation to Charles to step up to the plate and to give him a heads up, to call 911, do something. Okay, I'm going to back it up a little bit.
He didn't die. So what was her reaction at that point?
Well, I asked her, I'm like, why didn't he die? You were told he was supposed to die. Why?
Okay, right there. Wrong question. I mean, here you hear her casually asking Lori, hey, so why didn't he die? Like, God told you he was supposed to die. So why didn't he die? Wrong question. That was enabling. She gave her the opportunity to then go to Chad and to come up with some lame explanation for why Charles didn't die. And now we're going to hear that gag-worthy explanation.
He was supposed to die. Why didn't he die? And she said, Well, I think she went to Chad and asked because I don't think she knew the answer to that. And so he let her know that the accident that was supposed to happen didn't because of people's choices. So when things didn't go according to plan or according to a timing, it was only because of agency, and it would change. Oh, it's because somebody changed their agency. Very inconsistent.
Okay, so here you see she's distancing herself. You know, she's kind of ridiculing it there at the end, saying, oh, it's very inconsistent, which is giving her some moral distance from any kind of responsibility. Because it's just like, well, yeah, so Lori told me this, and then she went to Chad, and Chad explained that, you know, that it's agency, and she came back to me, and she's telling this story as if like she is completely like not a character in the events that transpired. And I think again, in my opinion, I think that's a consistent pattern with Melanie. It just seems like because she wasn't the one pulling the trigger or doing whatever may have been done to, you know, the kids, well, whatever was done to the kids by whomever may have done it, and Tammy, and who knows, Joe, you know, like, because she wasn't dispensing poison, pulling a trigger, she wasn't responsible. Like, it seems like she felt like she could almost kind of live vicariously through Lori. Here, she had been hearing about, you know, all of these teachings of multiple probations, and they treat death so casually, as if like they're just passing to the other side, you know, and that's their mission, and they're just moving on with their mission. And it's very enabling behavior. It's enabling behavior to a point of being deadly.
From what I understand.
Now, this, in my opinion, was the most disturbing segment of any of Melanie's interviews. This is where Melanie explains to Keith Morrison what she thought would happen. Now, keep in mind, oops, I didn't even touch it. Keep in mind, this is Melanie putting her best foot forward. She is being interviewed by Keith Morrison. This is for a national TV show. You know, she knows anything she says could end up on Dateline. And this is what she tells Keith. It is, in my opinion, absolutely staggering.
Melanie, at the time, could scarcely understand what happened. Lori had told her Chad's prophecy that Charles would die, but shot to death?
I'm thinking he's going to pass away, like they would have a prayer. Maybe the spirit will leave and his body would just die, you know, if it was really true that there was, if he was a zombie. And yeah, I just like, I didn't see that coming. Okay. That right there, in fact, it gets a little, there we go. This, I believe, now I have absolutely, I say this in just about every video, full disclosure, I have no training in law enforcement. I have no training in counseling, you know, therapy. I mean, psych 101 in college. That's the extent. And I just, you know, have read a bunch, but this is classic duping delight. And let's look at the definition of duping delight.
Melanie.
Oops. The pleasure someone gets from having someone else in their control and being able to manipulate them. Duping delight most often manifests as a grin or a smirk, which will flash across a person's face and is usually completely inappropriate to the topic that is being spoken about. You can read more about, whoops.
One of the people we haven't talked about is Tammy. How did you?
If you're interested in learning more, you can go to bit.ly/duping delight and learn more about it. And
And this was not her only example of duping delight. I just teased out one other example that I believe in my very non-professional opinion is also an example of duping delight.
One of the people we haven't talked about is Tammy. How did you learn that Tammy had died?
Someone texted me, a friend, not any, person that was associated close, but just a friend. She said, "Hey, just want to let you know she passed on." And then I said, "How did you find out?" She said, "Facebook."
What did you think when you saw that she had died?
I thought, "Oh my gosh, she died. That's what they said was going to happen. I wonder what happened."
Right there. That is people can be like socially awkward. Melanie does have some social awkwardness. I'm not trying to be mean or cruel. She does have some awkwardness, but that is an inappropriate response for what she's talking about. She's talking about yet another person dying. And it's like she's intoxicated by it. Like, yeah, they said that this was going to happen. I wonder what happened. And I think that this is insightful into what may have hooked Melanie, as she again was this happy ride along through the entire process. And by the time Tammy died, we already had a question mark over Joe, and Melanie did at least know about Joe, so we know that. So there's one ex-husband who's dead, who Lori said she wanted to murder. Then Charles was shot. And then at this point, this is October because Tammy died October 19th. So she's referencing October. So by that point, the kids were missing. She didn't get the call from Rexburg police yet. But again, I believe that she did know the kids were missing. And I'll get to Tylee in a minute.
So did you think
I'm going to back it up.
Died. That's what they said was going to happen. I wonder Facebook.
What did you think when you saw that she had died?
I thought, "Oh my gosh, she died. That's what they said was going to happen. I wonder what happened."
So did you think it was part of the plan?
I didn't know how they did it, but I knew it was part of the plan that she was supposed to pass away.
Okay, this is just so disturbing to me. She is saying in this interview, again, she knew that this was going to be televised, across the world. She's saying, I didn't know how they did it, but she knew it was part of the plan, that Tammy was supposed to die. So to me, again, no training in law enforcement, but this looks like potentially accessory after the fact. Like and I don't know that. I at minimum, complicity, because she doesn't do anything with this. All of these suspicious and really troubling things are happening in a very truncated time period. And then here, they're still talking about more victims. So Tammy had become a zombie. She also was supposed to die in a car accident, and she didn't die supposedly because of agency, and then she died. And so, for Melanie to say, I don't know how they did it, it's a clear indication that, to me, that she knew Tammy was murdered. Well, at this point, it's October 19th. All these weird things happened leading up to that with JJ and Tylee. So at any point, she could have called law enforcement. She could have said, "Hey, you know what? I need to come clean. I know that more is going on behind the scenes," and she could have called in a welfare check on the kids. At that point, October 19th, that would have shaved more than a month off of the time that they had been missing. JJ, it would have been less than a month after he was killed. And so, I just look at it, Rexburg wouldn't have been frozen over. There wouldn't have been all of these delays. So, okay. All right. I did jump out of order a little bit. We jumped ahead to October just because I wanted to show the example of duping delight, but we're going to get back into the timeline, the order of things. Okay, Melanie validated Lori's motive for moving to Houston by doing nothing. So now this is also a disturbing story. So Lori had gone on the lam. She took off within days of Chad telling her that Charles had been overtaken by this demon, Nick Schneider, and was violating her. So she was living with Alex for a while. Then she took off for Hawaii. Then she was back and forth. I also know that she went to a conference, I think in Utah, somewhere in there. Someone has told me that on the DL. I don't know that for sure. And that I don't think that's been publicly verified. But there's, we'll just say, a very good chance that she came back. This was like in mid-February, I think. Yeah, mid-February, for a conference. And, so she's like all over the place. And then she decides to move to Houston to reunite with Charles. And I don't include it in this live, but Melanie actually even asked her, well, why are you going to, or no, maybe it is included. But she asked Lori why she's going to Texas, and she's trying to divorce Charles. And this was Lori's response. So I can't show anything from Dateline unless I had already recorded it. For some reason, they took down all the recordings. So Keith said, by the spring of 2019, Lori and Tylee had left Kauai and quite unbelievably had moved to Houston to join JJ and Charles. And Melanie said, and she goes, well, I was told by the Lord I need to get his finances in order. Again, for anyone else, that would have been a huge red flag. Like, she's not telling Melanie, you know what, I made a mistake, or I want to make my marriage work, or, whatever. She's saying, I need to get Charles' finances in order. And then Melanie goes on, she started wondering, is Kay going to get the money? Because she now was told by Chad that Kay was a zombie. So she's like, I bet he's going to change it around. So clearly, Lori's motive in moving to Houston to be with Charles was to get the life insurance in order. She was afraid that it had been turned over to Kay, which it had been, and she was trying to get everything locked down. Apparently, when she felt confident that it had been locked down, then she left again, moving back to Arizona with Tylee. So again, this is a huge red flag. Like, okay, well, why would she need to be getting Charles' life insurance in order, and why are his finances in order, and why would she be talking about the life insurance? Clearly, there's evil is afoot. Okay, next. And this one I don't think has been shared publicly anywhere, but Melanie planned a meeting in Lori's home 7 days after Charles was murdered. This is a big one. This is a really, really big one. So someone had come into the True Crime Underground group. Shout out to True Crime Underground. I will miss you all very dearly. I won't be in there after tonight, but someone had come into the True Crime Underground group, I think a couple months ago or so, and had shared these emails that Melanie had sent out. So she was on Melanie's email list. She said she was more interested in like the, preparedness stuff, and hadn't been going to the meetings, which I'm totally fine with. I wouldn't have cared if she had been going to the meetings, because I'm sure there were people who went to those meetings who were very good people who are horrified by this story and would not have wanted to have anything to do with it. So Melanie she was this gatherer, as Jason Mow talked about, and she would have these meetings in her home, and that's what we heard a recording of, where Lori shared her testimony. And Melanie continued to have these meetings in her home, and she would send out these emails letting people know who was going to be speaking and where it was going to be, in her home. Well, in this case, it was, and you see the date here, and again, it's only as reliable as the person who submitted it to True Crime Underground. So this isn't a screenshot that I took. All of the, caveats that I can come up with. So obviously I was not on Melanie Gibb's email list, but this was shared in the group. And you see the date here was July 18th, 2019. Charles was shot and killed in Lori's home on July 11th. And it says here, class with David Warwick. So David was going to be flying in for this, or driving in. Well, he was going to be coming into town for this. So it's going to be on August 2nd. And she said, dear friends, August 2nd at 6 p.m. at Lori's home. So a man had just died a week before, had been shot by Lori's brother, and Melanie is having this get together in her home as if it's just moving on with business as usual. I asked David Warwick if he would like to come down to Arizona to speak to us about some of his dreams, about things that are coming upon our nation. David has been shown visions ever since he was 11 years old of future events. I have shared some of these visions in another live. They are deeply disturbing. So people who say, oh yeah, David talked sense into Melanie and that's why Melanie came forward and did the right thing. There is literally not one accurate statement in there. David was not talking sense into anyone. It was still 10 to 12 days before Melanie did anything with the information she had withheld from the police. And his visions are so deeply disturbing. And in fact, he even talks about tent cities, and I won't go too much into it, but one of the things that really jumped out at me in this story about the tent cities, because you'll see the overlap in one of the points that I make here in reference to the tent cities. But he talks about how these teenagers, they were in this tent city, and I guess they were complaining or they didn't like the tent city or something. For some reason, they left. And so they went out from the protection of the tent city and they found them dead. So the implications seem to be that leaving the protection of this tent city could result in death. And it was just so casually, there was this causation that was implied, that was very casual. And that is, again, that's a common denominator among these group members. They treat death so casually. They talk about it so casually as if you're just, moving on to the next chapter of your life. Okay. For some reason, the Lord has shown him the tribulations and the building of Zion for the second coming of the Lord, which I believe was going to be in Rexburg. He loves to share with his brother and sisters because of his love for his fellow man. He shares humbly and loves to help other people prepare for the Lord's coming. We will be having our class in Lori's home. I will be sending her address soon. Please let me know if you can come. We are looking forward to seeing you. I miss you guys. Please RSVP. Love you guys, Melanie Gibb. So, yeah, but there's nothing I can even add to that. To me, that just shows just a callous disregard. And I do also wonder if Melanie, and this is pure conjecture on my part, but I actually wonder if she was living with Lori at this time, because according to the Reddit email, and I don't put a whole lot of stock in it, but as I've mentioned in other lives, there are details in that Reddit email that were not shared publicly when before that had come out. And it's clearly, you see the influence of an insider in some of the details that are shared. But in that Reddit email, it says that Lori told Melanie she needed to leave, and then she called Alex. And so, and Melanie knows that she called Alex because she answered that question when Nate asked her about it. So I suspect she was there when Lori called Alex, because Melanie is very eager to distance herself, and she didn't distance herself in that question. She said, yes, she called Alex. And so there seems to be some credibility there. You know, again, I wouldn't put money on it per se. Maybe, I don't know. But if that's true, well, yeah. I mean, that may be the reason why Melanie is hosting this get together at Lori's instead of her own home. And another thing I had noted, there were multiple emails that that this person had shared, but most of them, if not all of them, Melanie included her street address at the bottom of the email, her phone number and her street address. And this one only had her phone number. It didn't have a street address. Now, she did say she would share the address later, but I did think it was interesting that she wasn't sharing a home address. You know, again, there could have been other reasons for that. That aside, highly inappropriate to even ask people to come to a home where a man had just died the week before. And in fact, Melanie had claimed in her interview with Nate, I do not believe a word of this, but she claimed that she didn't find out that Charles had been shot until 4 days later. We'll listen to that.
And the night before Charles died, didn't she call Alex and say, come and stay with me? Do you know?
There you go. Yeah.
And then the next day, Alex shot Charles. What do you think happened there?
I didn't know about it till like 4 days after it happened. She called me. She said, hey, did you see the news? I'm like, I don't watch the news.
Wait a
And then
second. What,
she told me.
your best friend did not tell you for 4 days that
Right.
her husband had been shot and killed?
Correct.
I love that Nate expressed, I think this is the only time that you see him as just incredible. Well, no, there was one other time that I remember when the whole thing about, you know, Chad telling her telling Lori they had been married in a previous life. Okay.
And next day, Alex shot Charles. What?
Oh, gosh.
And Alex shot Charles. What do you think happened there?
I didn't know about it till like 4 days after it happened. She called me. She said, hey, did you see the news? I'm like, I don't watch the news.
Wait a
And then
second.
she
What,
told me.
your best friend did not tell you for 4 days that
Right.
her husband had been shot and killed?
Correct. I found out through her, though. She did call me and let me know. And she said, have you not heard and watched the news? I said, I don't watch the news. And she said, Charles was shot. And I'm like, what? So tell me what happened.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to call BS on that. I just don't believe a word of that.
And
I think she is almost as loose with the truth as Melanie Pulowski, who is almost as loose with the truth as Lori Vallow. And I just realized this, putting, you know, different items together. There was a surprise guest at this meeting. Oops.
And are you familiar with Lori Vallow Daybell?
Sorry, what was that?
Are you familiar with Lori Vallow Daybell?
Yes,
When did you meet her?
we met her first week of August, 2019.
First week of August 2019. That get together was scheduled for August 2nd. And this is David Warwick, by the way. He is Melanie Gibb's boyfriend.
Where was that?
At her home,
Where was
At Lori's home.
Gilbert, Arizona.
Okay. Was Chad Daybell there?
Yes.
Boom. Chad was there. So that was really surprising to me to like actually
sit down, but put all of these items together. Again, this is why I'm so passionate about timelines. I need to update mine on my site. It's become so cumbersome that my site crashes multiple times when I try to update it, but I will update it eventually. But here we find out that Chad was also there. So this email went out a week after Charles was killed by Alex. And plans were made for David to come in and speak to the group, and Chad also joined. This is highly inappropriate. I mean, grossly inappropriate. And Melanie is at the center of this. She's the one organizing this meeting. Again, at any point, she could have decided to bounce. She could have said, this is too much. I didn't know a man was going to be shot. I thought we would just have a prayer meeting and God would murder him. I didn't know he was going to be shot by a gun. But so at any point she could have bounced, but she didn't. And I just wonder if this right there that happened that weekend, if that's, and this is pure conjecture on my part, because I'm just trying to figure out what was in it for Melanie. Like, what did she get out of this besides, kind of living vicariously through Lori? But even that's not it. That's not explained in this. And so I just wonder if this was the first time. I don't wonder if this was the first time, unless David committed perjury. He said that this was the first time he had met Lori Vallow. And so this would have been their first time together as couples. And so I just wonder if Melanie was, she was just checked out. She had left her husband, her kids. I'm not going to weigh in on that, but you see her as just kind of like checking out of like this bourgeois everyday life. So she was kind of Belle, just frustrated by all of these pedestrian activities of taking care of a family, doing laundry, making dinner, all of these things. She wanted to do something big with her life. She wanted to be part of something big, something significant, the 144,000. And so it looks to me like quite possibly she kind of attached herself to this mission because she saw that those two, like, as couples, they were going to lead this whole mission. Chad and Lori would be at the forefront, but it certainly looks like David and Melanie would be at Chad and Lori's right hand. And we'll get to that more in a minute when we talk about their little field trip. All right, I've talked about this before, so I won't go too far into it, although I will weigh in with something I just discovered a couple days ago, and to me it was kind of shocking, but we'll see. Your mileage may vary. So Melanie didn't ask about Tylee. I've talked about this before. I'm going to give a little bit of background because I don't want to assume prior knowledge when someone watches any of these videos. So this was from the affidavit of probable cause. And it says here, this was the affidavit of probable cause for Chad Daybell. It says here, Melanie Gibb has further informed me that Lori Vallow called Tylee a zombie in the spring of 2019. So this was before Charles was even shot. So this was in between Chad identifying Charles as a zombie, because this whole thing morphed from Charles being overtaken by an evil spirit to Charles being a zombie, because Melanie Gibb, she said to Nate Eaton at one point, I don't think they were calling people zombies at that point. But then she said in her interview with Keith Morrison, where we saw that example of duping delight, she, dropped in this little detail if he really was a zombie. So we do know that Charles was identified as a zombie. So Charles was identified as a zombie. Then Tylee was identified as a zombie. Then Charles was murdered, and Melanie had a front row seat for all of this. Okay, moving on.
Gibb was on the phone with Lori and heard Lori call Tylee a zombie, to which Tylee responded, "Not me, Mom." This arose out of Lori requiring Tylee to babysit JJ, and Tylee did not want to. Lori Vallow also told Gibb that Tylee had turned into a zombie. So this may also be tied into like Lori telling the babysitter who watched JJ for one night in Rexburg that like Tylee required to be paid. So who knows if, you know, Tylee was saying she's not going to watch JJ for free. Who knows any of these details except for Melanie. But Melanie heard Lori call Tylee a zombie. And Melanie was very familiar with all of their teaching. Again, if you want to learn more about it, Ian Pulowski wrote out detailed notes about what this whole zombie thing was about. And I also pulled together a dashboard. I mean, that's how I find all of these quotes, is that I'm searching the dashboards because it's all live text. So if you want to learn more about it, knock yourself out. Okay. Now, also in one of the episodes of Dateline, What Happened to JJ and Tylee, it was the last one released. He said Melanie knew by then Lori had told her that Tylee had been declared a zombie. Melanie said Chad had told her, oh, she wasn't made a zombie just recently. She turned into a zombie back when she became a difficult teenager. Again, you know, I wish I could show the video because her affect was off again. You know, she's just showing like this delight over something that was really, really disturbing because she knew what the ramifications of that were. Okay, also, you know, I know people have pushed back and said, you know, Melanie wouldn't have known that Tylee wasn't at BYU. I challenge that because, well, one, it doesn't make any sense. And I've gone into this in another live, their apartment was 1 mile up the street from BYU. They were in married student housing, according to then Melanie Boudreau's U-Haul application. She said she was moving into student housing. And also, why would Tylee's car still be there? And Tylee was only 16 and she had a GED. So you can't live on campus at 16. And BYU is a pretty competitive school. Like, it's just not like that's a heavy lift to ask someone to believe that their 16-year-old with a GED. So, you know, Lori's having her cut corners academically. You know, Tylee would be competing against, you know, other kids who they were in school, they took AP classes, they did things to prepare for college, and Tylee didn't because of the influence of her mother. So it would have been a really heavy lift, but Melanie tells us that she didn't believe it. So let's take a listen.
Did you stay with Lori at that time when you went up to visit her? Mm-hmm. And were the kids there?
JJ was.
But Tylee was not.
Tylee was not.
Where was she?
I was told she was at BYU.
BYU in Provo?
Idaho.
BYU in Idaho. Would that have been a normal answer? Like a normal, okay, that makes sense type thing?
Well, I knew that Tylee had had her GED that she got when she was 16 or 17. I'm not sure exactly the age. And so it could have been plausible, but it didn't feel like it. There was definitely question marks. It was question marks for me. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel like the truth. I didn't know what to say about it. I wouldn't assume that she had done something to her. So it was kind of, I don't know. It was unusual.
But you didn't question her.
I didn't question it.
That is another theme. Melanie Pulowski says the same thing, that she didn't question. No one was questioning, you know. And in fact, I created a keyword group in the dashboard just around that theme because it's such a theme throughout all of these interviews. Like, yeah, I didn't question it. Well, yeah, you should have been questioning it.
Was JJ with you on the walks?
No.
Where was he?
Oh, let me back up a little bit.
JJ with you on
Oops.
the walks?
First it was
Sorry, I didn't. I tested this, but I have never embedded the videos in the presentation.
Stay
So
with
was definitely question marks. It was question marks for me. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel like the truth. I didn't know what to say about it. I wouldn't assume that she had done something to her, so it was kind of, I don't know. It was unusual.
But you didn't question her.
I didn't question it.
Was JJ with you on the walks?
No.
Where was he?
He was at home.
By himself?
His uncle was watching him.
Alex.
Yeah,
Okay. So JJ's home with Alex, but there's no sign of Tylee.
correct.
And how long did you stay with Lori? That was it for a week?
So Thursday to a Monday morning.
I'm assuming Tylee never called her. She never called Tylee.
She didn't even talk about her.
Never spoke about Tylee.
again, I just find it shocking that Melanie offers these details, and I've talked about this in another live, so I won't go too deeply into it. But the fact that Tylee would start BYU as a 16-year-old with a GED, and for Lori to not even talk about her on top of everything else. And we also know that Melanie, Lori, and Chad, maybe David, we don't know, walked the track on the BYU campus. No one said, hey, you know what? Maybe we should get, let's call Tylee. Let's, take her for lunch, or, but she takes it to the next level. Lori never even talked about her. Lori would have been so excited that her daughter was accepted into BYU. Lori never went to college. This would have been a really exciting thing. So yeah, this should have been a huge red flag. All of these things together should have been a huge red flag for Melanie. I think she didn't ask questions because I personally believe she knew the answer.
Did you stay with Lori?
Okay. And it's also worth noting, it wasn't worth creating another video for this, but Melanie stayed in Tylee's room. We found that out in the court hearing for Chad. This was the second day of the court hearing. John Pryor, who is Chad Daybell's attorney, said to Melanie, and then you were staying in, and I've had the opportunity to go through, so ignore the first part. I've had the opportunity to go through all the police reports and all the evidence, but you were staying in Lori Vallow's apartment. Is that correct? Melanie said correct. Pryor. And you and David were staying in Tylee's room, from what I understand, the statements that were previously given. Is that correct? And she said, I was. Oh, where was David staying? In JJ's room. So here you have Melanie staying in Tylee's room while not believing she was at BYU. And this has nothing to do with it just didn't feel like the truth. It didn't make sense. Stop trying to super spiritualize everything. Things don't have to feel right or feel like the truth. You assess facts. And on top of it, we know that she had said that Lori told her the day before she got there, JJ had turned into a zombie. And Lori was obsessively explaining to her these signs that JJ had turned into a zombie. And it was stuff like quietly watching television and saying that he loves Satan, and, all of these absolutely bizarre things. So here again, Melanie knew the ramifications of someone turning into a zombie. She knew that Tylee had been declared a zombie, and now she's missing, but she just suffers from this deplorable lack of curiosity, while at the same time, Lori has now moved the target onto JJ, and still Melanie has no questions. She doesn't call in a welfare check while she's there, or at minimum after she's there. Nothing. Okay. Now, this was the part that was really surprising. So I searched the dashboard for BYU because I was just curious, okay, I want to see all the instances where anyone interviewed talked about BYU. And I was particularly curious about Melanie because Melanie Pulaski, formerly Melanie Boudreau, she married Ian Pulaski.
because I was like, I don't remember Melanie sharing this story. And sure enough, she does not corroborate Melanie Gibb's claim about Tylee being at BYU. This is what Melanie says.
And hey, did you visit Rexburg at all before? Like, did you come up and visit Lori before you moved here?
I did in.
Okay, here she's about to say, and this is a big question I have. When we know that she went up to Rexburg before she even went up to sign the apartment. And that's a huge question mark. When was she in Rexburg? And she also dances around this issue of seeing the kids. When Keith Morrison asked her about it, he said, did you see the kids when you were up there? And she, gave unnecessary detail, like, when I moved up there, no, I did not see the kids. And Keith said something to the effect of, they weren't there, were they? And she said, when I moved up there, no, they were not there. So that has always bothered me. Like, why does she add that unnecessary, seemingly unnecessary detail? So I do wonder if she was there when at least JJ was alive. I don't know. I do hope that someone will ask that question in the trial. Okay, but when she doesn't like to be tied down to any specifics, any kind of dates. So she's about to share a date, and then she goes into full on Melanie Pulaski mode. I'm going to rewind it just a little bit.
I did I think on a weekend where I didn't, because we had 50-50.
Here it goes.
My ex-friend Joe and I, and so anytime I didn't have, wasn't my time with the kids, I was a wreck and just missed my kids, and so I tried to go hike in Arizona or go on a trip, and I did go visit Lori for a weekend up there, and she said, just come, try out somewhere new, travel, and come see if you like it up here. And we toured BYU, Idaho, and she said Tylee was with friends, and she always is with friends, so I didn't ask any questions about that. And
so notice she did not say, Melanie Pulaski, who will lie about anything, she never says that Tylee was at BYU. She just says that Tylee was with friends. Now, I don't know what friends Tylee would have had. She was only up there for a week before she was murdered. But here's Melanie's story. I'm going to back it up just a little bit because I'm interrupting, but I want to make sure that this point is made. Like, Melanie will say anything about anything, but she didn't say that Lori told her that Tylee was at BYU, and she lived next door for almost a month and stayed in her home 2 different weekends before moving up there the first week in November. So, so my point there is, she could have really used this story that Tylee was at BYU, but she apparently didn't think about it.
JJ's either doing some type of therapy or with a nanny or in a school that will help him. And so if I didn't see him, I wasn't asking, where is he?
Yeah, because that would be so crazy. She lived, I think it was across the hall. It was very close. And I mentioned this again in another live, but one thing about JJ's autism, at least this was my personal experience because I stayed with them in 2018, fell in love with JJ, but he doesn't have an inside voice. At that point, they were living in a 5,000 square foot house. And if I was on one side of the house, like the game room, I heard JJ on the other side of the house. He was a loud little boy. His inside voice was everyone else's, like outside voice, maybe third base coach voice, yelling at a kid to take home. He just was loud. He was sweet as can be. And I do not have that tendency to just say cloying things about someone because they've passed. JJ was very, very sweet, but he was loud. So for Melanie to first of all, be in the apartment, you can't
be in Lori's apartment and be like, I don't know, he was just always, at therapy appointments or with the nanny or, at schools that could help him, like 24/7, it makes absolutely no sense. So, but, she didn't ask questions. But my point here is, and what I'm leading up to is, after watching this and after kind of chewing the cud for a little bit, I don't believe Melanie Gibb's story. I just don't. I just think, like, knowing that Melanie Pulaski will say anything, and she didn't ever offer up that Tylee was at BYU, to me, it casts a suspicious light on Melanie's claim. Melanie needed a reason, a compelling reason, to offer people and law enforcement for why there were no red flags tripped when she stayed in Tylee's room and Tylee wasn't there. So, all right, moving on to the next thing. Okay, we're almost finished. 2 zombies in. Melanie still didn't order a welfare check when Lori called JJ a zombie. This is, again, from the affidavit of probable cause for Chad Daybell. On June 3rd, 2020, I interviewed Melanie Gibb and her boyfriend, David Warwick, in Pleasant Grove, Utah. That's where David Warwick lives. We discussed in depth the weekend of September 22nd and 23rd, 2019. That was the weekend that JJ died and was buried in Chad's backyard. Due to the fact that both Gibb and Warwick stayed in Lori Vallow's residence in Rexburg that weekend. Now, one thing to clarify here a little bit is Melanie got to Lori's on the 19th, which was a Thursday. David Warwick didn't get to Lori's until Friday evening, so the evening of the 20th. But they are specifically asking about the 22nd and the 23rd, and I am really going to hit the 22nd hard, because in doing the research for this live, I have come to the conclusion, I think there are some details about the 22nd that I think hold the truth in terms, potentially hold the truth in terms of what happened to JJ. There are some very concerning gaps and inconsistencies. So, but foreshadowing. Anyway, Gibb informed me, consistent with information she has previously given law enforcement, that she arrived in Rexburg on September 19th, 2019. Soon after she arrived, Lori Vallow informed Gibb that JJ had become a zombie and pointed out behaviors such as sitting still and watching TV, because no kid does that. Claiming JJ said he loved Satan and an increased vocabulary as evidence that JJ was now a zombie. Gibb observed JJ's behavior and felt it to be the same as she had always observed it. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that Lori had stopped giving JJ his meds. And so it does sound like the JJ Melanie met or not met, because she didn't stop giving JJ his meds until after the big blow up with Charles. It said in the affidavit of probable cause that his medication hadn't been filled since, I think, January 2019. So I'm sure JJ's behavior was more erratic than the version of JJ I saw when he was taking his medication. He was, he had services. He had his amazing dog, Bailey. I love that dog so much. And a loving home. I mean, I've said this in other lives, but I didn't detect any inappropriate behavior on Lori's part toward JJ at all. She was very loving, doting, and so there were no red flags with JJ. There were with Tylee, but anyway, so okay. But for Melanie to be like, you know what, I watched JJ, and she even said this in an interview. He just seemed like typical JJ. Like, that is enabling behavior. Even the fact that she is having, like, trying to have a discussion, like, okay, I heard you out. And let me give this some credence. Like, okay, I'm watching him. Yeah, and just not seeing it. Like, no, let's back that up. It's not normal to refer to a child as a zombie. It's beyond the scope of possibility for a child to turn into a zombie. Like, these are the wrong conversations that she should have been having with Lori. And all of these things, again, this is why I said early on, these things individually might not be as troublesome. But when you take in, and we're not even finished, but when you take in the cumulative impact of, it's like person after person after person, and Melanie is just, you know, like by Lori's side, even when she tries to distance herself, it's like, Melanie, that is not nearly enough distance. You know, like, you think you're distancing yourself to protect yourself from public scrutiny or, you know, potential culpability with law enforcement, but you are not giving yourself enough distance here. And she can't, because then it would just beg the question, why didn't you call the police? Okay. Then there was this interaction. This also came from Dateline, what happened to JJ and Tylee. And this was David Warwick. He's being interviewed by Keith. He said, when I went to say goodbye, Lori was just there, and she said that JJ had one of his zombie moments. Again, you know, you could just stop right there. Like just stop and call 911. Like, JJ's not there. You're inquiring, you know, where's JJ? And this is the explanation that Lori offers up. The only appropriate response to this is, you know what? Just say, gotta go, call 911. Well, you should have called 911 long before this point, but this point, it is absolutely inexcusable. Like, you don't continue to engage in conversation about this. And if you're afraid for your life, then you get in the car and you call 911, but they didn't do that. Okay, so JJ had one of his zombie moments and climbed up on my fridge. Pushed my picture of Christ down and climbed up onto the upper cabinets and was stuck between the ceiling and the cabinet and just raging. Now, I'm going to stop right here. This is a small apartment. I think maybe around 1,300 square feet, an open layout, and JJ is loud. He was loud in a 5,000 square foot house, mansion almost, you know. So for him to be clamoring up to this top cabinet and raging, like, then that begs the question, why didn't you hear? Like, I understand David has some hearing disabilities. He doesn't have that much of a hearing disability. There were times where Rob Wood and John Pryor both spoke at a pretty low volume and he was able to pick up. So, you know, you're talking about a raging child. Lori would be frantically trying to get him down if she were acting like a normal mother, because this would have been incredibly dangerous. And there's no panic on their part. Okay. And they don't seem to question, why didn't we hear this if JJ had been raging? And, you know, I'm looking at the cabinets again. It's a wrong response, but, and I saw absolutely no sign of any damage of any kind, not even a scuff. Of course you didn't. Keith, you knew right away she was lying to you. David said, yeah. So I just said, I would like to see JJ. And I wanted to see him. And she said, oh, he was out of control. So I had Alex come and get him. This is the cabinet. So I found pictures of the layouts of the apartments, that it was a 3-bedroom apartment like Lori. So it stands to reason that I don't know for sure. I've never been to these apartments, but this sounds like that. I mean, this looks like this would have been the layout that he described. It's pretty high up there. So, you know, again, And also, I know some people have said, well, you know, they had a child who was on the spectrum, and that child was a climber. JJ was not a climber. Now, I was only there for 5 days. In the 5 days that I was, I believe 5 days, in the 5 days that I was with them in Queen Creek, I didn't see him climb up on anything. He was a runner, but his movements were kind of jerky and awkward, absolutely adorable. But a function of his autism is he just ran in circuits. So he had this circuit that spanned 3 rooms and a hallway, and he would just run in these circuits. But I never saw him climb up on anything. And so, you know, this just, yeah. But even if he did, like, let's suspend reality for a moment and say, okay, JJ figured out how to climb up on the counter and then the refrigerator and then the cabinet. Once again, they would have heard it. Another thing that I take issue with is that David had said that he came down between 8 and 9. And so for him to expect JJ to be there was unrealistic. I believe I've heard that David has 7 kids. Melanie has 4 kids. So they've gotten kids off to school. No elementary school starts between 8 and 9. So even if they had said that, you know, Lori said, well, I got him ready for school and Alex took him to school, that there's some plausible deniability. But the fact that Lori, according to David's testimony, said that, you know, he was out of control, so she had Alex come and get him. I mean, that's alarming. That sounds foreboding and alarming. And they just got in their car and left and didn't order a welfare check, didn't do anything. Okay. Number 11, Melanie didn't try to save Tammy. So again, we have quite a few disturbing incidences leading up to this. Oh, whoops, this was the wrong. I thought I had saved this. This was about Tammy.
I want to get back to that in a minute. But in September, she moved. She tells you that she needs to go up there. And what was your reaction about Chad telling her she needs to come up there, knowing that Chad still has the wife and 5 kids?
Yeah, well, we talked about that. I'm like, isn't that going to be awkward? She was uncomfortable with it. She believed that Tammy was going to pass away, though, before she got up there. And that didn't happen. She didn't pass away before she got up there. And so I thought, you know, I said, aren't you uncomfortable? Maybe she'll see you guys together. And so I thought.
I don't know why it's doing this.
I want to get back to that in a minute.
Tammy was still alive.
And she told you, well, Tammy will die.
That she was going to be up there when Tammy was still alive.
And she told you, well, Tammy will die before I move up there.
Right.
How was she going to die?
I heard a few times maybe through a car accident, something like that.
Okay, I'm going to stop right there. First, she shakes her head no, like, yeah, I don't know. But then she realizes, okay, that's probably not going to be believable. And she throws out a statement that is pretty outrageous in and of itself. She said, and I'm just going to rewind it just to point it out a little bit more here.
I heard a few times.
Right there. I heard a few times maybe she was going to die in a car accident. A few times. That means that there were multiple conversations about Tammy dying in a car accident. This is after this whole string of really disturbing events. And they're having multiple conversations about a woman dying. And it just happens to be the wife of her friend's lover.
Maybe through a car accident.
I don't know why that's doing that. I must be bumping something.
I want to get back to.
So I thought it was different, you know, that she was going to be up there when Tammy was still alive.
And she told you, well, Tammy will die before I move up there.
Right.
How was she going to die?
I heard a few times maybe through a car accident or something like that.
So they thought Tammy would be in a car crash.
Yeah.
would pass away, then Lori would move up there, and then she could marry Chad. And when that didn't happen, she said, I've still got to go.
Yeah, because, you know, the other side of the veil she's talking to, she said, I need to be there by this date. And
She's communicating with
someone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, you know, Lori's communicating, Chad's communicating with people from the other side of the veil. How convenient. At this point, I have no patience for Melanie, but it doesn't stop there.
I want to get back.
Regarding Tammy dying, Melanie said this, and this was on that same episode of Dateline. Keith said, not that Tammy would mind so much. Chad told them, wouldn't mind dying, that is. And Melanie said, she'd understand. That's what he would say. She would understand. So she's reporting this like that, you know, that Chad told her that Tammy would understand. And Melanie is repeating this as if this is like normal behavior to repeat this. And it just makes me really question if these are the things that she thought were okay to share publicly, what is she holding back? Because this is really, really bizarre to be justifying, but she thinks she's not justifying it. She thinks like she's just reporting on, you know, what Chad said, not comprehending the culpability that she has, whether she's legally culpable. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about moral culpability. Like, you heard a man explain that his wife would understand that she needed to move on, so Chad could move on to phase 2 of his life. It's absolutely inexcusable. Melanie dodged Gilbert Police Department and then lied for Lori regarding JJ's whereabouts. Okay, so I took issue with Melanie early on, as early as February 2020, obviously 2020, because of this article I had read, and I'm just going to read a snippet of it. He said, and this was from Fox 13, Salt Lake City. One of the charges against Lori states that both she and Chad tried to get their friend to lie about the kid's location, a woman named Melanie Gibb who lives in Arizona. If that name sounds familiar, that's because she was their co-host on the Preparing a People podcast. Our sources close to the family say Gibb has a lawyer. Now, we know later on when she's talking to Nate, he asked about a lawyer, and she said she didn't need a lawyer because God was on her side. But she had a lawyer, according to the source, and is cooperating with the investigation. She says she refused to lie for Chad and Lori, despite both of them making separate phone calls asking her to lie about the kid's location. So this was February 21st. And we didn't find out until August 3rd or 4th in the hearing, because her testimony was split between 2 days. So it was one of those 2 days that no, she did lie. But she just like allowed us all to believe that she didn't lie, that she in fact refused to lie for Chad and Lori. If she had told Fox 13 that's not accurate, they would have had to publish a correction. No correction was ever published. I pulled this a couple weeks ago. Okay, again, pointing back to the affidavit of probable cause, which gives us a little bit more of the story, but not there's an inaccuracy in the affidavit, and I'll hit on that. On the same day, myself and Detective Stubbs of the Rexburg Police Department located and spoke with Lori Vallow in her apartment, number 175. We identified ourselves as RPD officers. Lori told us that JJ Vallow was in Gilbert, Arizona with a friend named Melanie Gibb. We obtained Melanie's phone number from Lori. We ended our contact with Lori and immediately attempted to call Melanie Gibb. We were unable to contact her. And this was the thing that when this was published on February 18th, I was like, wait, what? And I've shared a little bit when the live about my brother, my life has a bit of an overlap with regard to welfare checks and abductions, because I was abducted twice, and I grew up in foster care, and I had 2 different foster siblings who were abducted. So when a child goes missing, like I was a teenager when my youngest foster sister was abducted, I mean, it's like the world stops, like when the Woodcocks called in this welfare check, they already had to wait overnight. Then you are waiting with bated breath. You are, and we didn't have cell phones back then because I'm hella old, but like you're waiting for the phone to ring. Like the anxiety level is so high, as you're waiting for some kind of news to find out, like if the police found the missing child. And here you have, so when I read this, I'm kind of like, like thinking back, remembering back to what that felt like. And so the fact that it says we were unable to contact her, that was the first thing that really caught my attention. And I was like, what is up with this Melanie Gibb person? All right, next point. Because Detective Stubbs and I were unable to contact Melanie Gibb, we immediately contacted Lori Vallow again. Now we've heard the body cam audio of that interaction. It was crazy. If you want to listen to that, I think East Idaho News has a separate recording of that on their YouTube channel. Okay, contacted Lori again, and we requested that she call Melanie Gibb. At this time, Lori told us that Melanie and JJ Vallow were at the movie Frozen 2, so it was unlikely Melanie would answer the phone. And so I was just like, well, even if that had been true, you're talking about like people from law enforcement, like police officers are contacting you. We find out later they called her and they texted her, and she's just not responding to these calls and these texts. We instructed Lori to call Melanie Gibb and have her call us so we could verify the location of JJ Vallow. And there's more. By the evening, this was the point, I just felt enraged. By the evening of November 26, 2019, we had still not heard from Melanie Gibb. So Rexburg Police Department informed Detective Ryan Pillar of the Gilbert Police Department, so that's in Arizona, of the information we had received regarding the children being with Melanie Gibb. I was informed later that evening around 9:30 p.m. that Gilbert police went to the home of Melanie Gibb. So he calls Melanie. He doesn't get an answer. So then he goes to her home, but that's unfruitful because she's with David. I do wonder, and no one has asked about this, maybe they will in the trial, but I just want, I mean, this is just pure conjecture. It's not even conjecture, really. It's just a curiosity. I wonder if part of the reason she didn't reply in a timely manner is if she was on her way to David's, like if she got scared that, Lori had chucked her under the bus and she took off for David. So I have no idea. But anyway, she stated that JJ Vallow was not staying at her Arizona house and had not been there for several months. It wasn't until the trial that we found out that that was not true, that that she did say that JJ had been at her house, but was either back in Rexburg or on his way back to Rexburg. So we don't know everything that the detective from Gilbert Police asked her, this Ryan Pillar, but it would beg further explanation. Like, how would JJ be back, like on his way to Rexburg? Like, who would have been escorting him? But anyway, okay. So let's take a listen.
Tell me how many times you spoke with the Gilbert Police Department?
Oh, multiple times, maybe 5 or 6.
Okay. Do you have a recollection of the first time you spoke with the Gilbert Police Department?
I believe it was December. I'm sorry, in person or on phone?
On the phone.
On phone. I believe it was December 7th or 8th.
Is it possible that in November, Officer Pillar left you a phone message to back him and call him?
keep in mind, November, he's referencing the welfare check. And she's like, November, did something happen in November? Let me think.
Yeah.
And then in November, you didn't call him back right away, is that correct?
Correct.
And then at some point, you did have contact with him. Did you initiate the contact, or did Officer Gilbert initiate the contact?
He meant Pillar.
Well, he first initiated it, and then I secondly initiated it.
So you called him back
Correct.
sometime after he had called you, correct?
That's correct.
How much time passed between when you left the message and when you got back?
I would say within an hour, possibly.
All right, moving on. I am curious about that December bit. Like, I am curious. Okay, so when did she actually talk to Detective Pillar or Officer Pillar? Because it would have had to be in November, because they reported back to the Woodcocks then the next day, unless they just got the information from Colby, because we know that the day before Thanksgiving, which would have been the 27th, Gilbert Police Department went to Colby's, and that's how they found out that Tylee was also in the house, so that there was a second minor. So, you know, that enters a huge question mark in my mind, that she's saying that she didn't talk to Detective Pillar until December 7th or 8th. Earlier or at another point, yeah, I think it was earlier, she said she thought it was December 6th, but it could have been 1 or 2 days later. I think she didn't talk to Detective Pillar until December 8th, because it did, you know, I could be wrong, but I think she needed that recording, and the crazy recording between her and Lori, which we know happened December 8th. So I think she came bearing gifts, but, you know, we'll find out. I do hope that they, you know, kind of narrow her down a little more on some of these details.
What contact did you have with Officer Pillar that day?
He called me, left a message, and I returned his phone call.
Okay. What was the nature of your conversation with Officer Pillar?
He was responding to the Rexburg police and was asking about JJ.
Okay, so here she's saying she did talk to him that day. So it sounds like she talked to him later in the evening, sometime past 9:30 p.m. on the 26th.
His whereabouts.
Okay, and what did you tell him?
I told him that I had been with JJ, but that he was back with Lori.
Okay. When you said you had been with him, what did you mean by that?
That he was with me, and then she came to get him.
Okay.
So that it would turn the police back to Rexburg and not with me, because I.
So this is a different account than what was in the affidavit of probable cause, where it said that JJ was either back in Rexburg or on his way. Here she was saying that Lori came and got him.
Yeah.
Now, Ms. Gibb, had you recently had JJ with you?
No.
So when you told Detective Pillar that you had, was that an accurate statement?
No, it was not.
Okay. And did you believe that JJ was actually with Lori at that time?
I was not sure.
Okay. So was that, pursuant to the knowledge you had, was that an accurate statement?
Yeah.
Okay. But did you also tell Detective Pillar that JJ was not with you?
Correct.
And was that an accurate statement?
Yes.
Is there a reason you told Detective Pillar you had him?
Yes, because Lori was misleading, and she was manipulating me or trying to convince me that he and she was in danger. And so because of our friendship, I thought, I have really no idea if this could be true or not. And I was very perplexed, very troubled, and I really did not know what to do. I was trying to reconcile all these feelings I had.
Okay, I'm just not even going to touch that. All right.
What contact?
Moving on. Oh yeah, I'm not going to play this. This is where she talks about how it was either. Well, no, I'll just play it. So she didn't correct her. Actually, no, I will kind of emphasize this. So this might have just been me, but for some reason, I was under the impression that the only thing that she came clean, well, not for some reason, because the affidavit of probable cause said that she said that, you know, she hadn't seen JJ and he hadn't been in her home for months. But I thought the only thing she kind of came clean on was letting Rexburg Police Department know that they had asked her to lie. So it wasn't until the hearing. Well, it wasn't until the hearing and that we even found out that she lied. But then it wasn't until I was like you going back through all the videos that I was like, oh, okay, no, she didn't correct the lie about having never had JJ for 10 to 12 days. I think it was 12 days. I think it was the 8th. We'll just take a listen.
And then at some point there was a question regarding the whereabouts of JJ, is that right?
Correct.
And at that point you had advised him that you had JJ in your care, correct?
I told him that I had him and then I didn't have him.
So the initial time that you told him that you had JJ, that was not a truthful statement to Officer Pillar, was it?
Correct.
And when you tell a statement that's not accurate to a police officer, that's a lie, is it not?
Correct.
So you lied to a police officer, is that correct?
Correct.
And then at some point, how long between the time when you told that lie to the police officer regarding the whereabouts of JJ Vallow did you correct your lie? How much time passed?
Till I spoke to him on December 6th, I believe. I could be off a day or two.
So
when Melanie says like she could be off a day or two, like just add the 2 days, because this is also a pattern for her in her testimonies and her interviews, is that she like kind of pushes out as much as possible. And we will see this in a major way in the last point.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I want an accurate reflection of the amount of time that we're talking about. The initial call from Officer Gilbert occurred sometime in late November. Did you have any reason to disagree with that, ma'am?
No.
And then the time when you decided to tell Officer Gilbert the truth, at least what you think the truth is, was sometime in December, the 6th of December.
Correct.
So approximately 10 to 12 days passed from the time you told your first lie to when you decided to come up with a different story for Officer Gilbert later on, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Last one. Melanie potentially covered for Lori regarding the trip to go and look at the property in Rexburg. So a little bit of background. On Sunday, the 22nd, we know that a group of them went out to look at a parcel of property, and it's a pretty significant parcel of property. I wish I would have included a screenshot. Someone from the TCU group, Annie Southam, had dropped in the screenshot, and it's a significant lot of land. And Chad wanted David to look at this land. So they all had this vision of these, having a tent city. And then they thought that Rexburg was critical to the second coming of Jesus. And so it kind of makes sense that they would want to look at this
property, or at least it's a feasible explanation that the reason that they would want to look at this property would have been to start building that tent city. Also, you know, Chad had this really big issue of having 2 children buried in his backyard. So I wonder, especially given how shallow JJ's grave was, I think it was only 6 to 7 inches. One of the detectives estimated, I think it was Hermosillo. That's a very, very shallow grave. And so I wonder if Chad was hoping to be able to, move the kids' remains. Another reason I wonder that is that we know that Chad applied for a permit to be able to put a permanent structure in his backyard, and the permit was denied. And so, you know, like even when he applied for that, I was just like, oh my gosh, like, would he have been dumb enough to bury the kids in his backyard? Because that was everyone's first thought, you know, like he doesn't have young kids at home. Why would he possibly need, you know, a trailer in his backyard? So they go out on this trip, and we're going to dive into this a little bit. So Melanie testified that Lori wasn't present to look at the property, that only she, Chad, David, and Alex went on this outing. This is what she said.
Now, on Sunday the 22nd, did David and Chad go to deal with some real estate matters together?
I did as well, and so Alex was there too.
Oh, that was news to me. I wasn't aware you went as well. Where did you guys go?
We went to a lot that was close to Mr. Daybell's home.
And what time was that? Do you recall?
It was sometime in the afternoon. I don't recall exactly.
Okay. Sometime meaning between 12 and 5 or 6?
I would say either late morning or early afternoon.
And the purpose of that was for what?
Chad wanted to show this piece of land to David, and he encouraged him to consider building on that land.
Is your boyfriend in the real estate business now?
General contractor.
Is Lori Vallow present for that?
No.
Okay, so Melanie says that Lori wasn't present. Now, even I missed a lot of the testimonies because I was like meeting with clients and stuff, and so I didn't catch that part of the trial. So I'm glad I've been like going back over these videos, but that gave me pause, just because that would be very unlike Lori to say, okay, yeah, you guys go on and do this exciting adventure, go look at this property where, you know, that could possibly be the site of our tent city. I'm adding that in as conjecture. And I'll just stay here with my special needs son. And, you know, that's just not in keeping with Lori. Possible, but pretty improbable. But then David Warwick said she was present. Let's take a listen.
There was one of those multiple times. The 2 or 3 times you saw Mr. Daybell was you and a piece of property. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that was at what time? That was on the Sunday, the 22nd?
It was a Sunday. It was Sunday. I can't remember if it was late morning or afternoon.
And who was present at that real estate trip?
Okay, I'm going to flag that really quickly. It could be coincidental, but it does seem, first of all, seems suspicious that throughout their testimonies about Sunday, David and Melanie are both incredibly vague. Like, they really can't remember much of anything. And I find that suspicious because of what I talked about earlier, that, you know, like,
it would have been their natural proclivity to rewind and replay that day over and over, trying to figure out, what they got pulled into. And, and so for them to just be like, oh, I don't know. And I don't think I include this, but like, maybe I did, but Pryor asked Melanie how many times she saw Alex in Lori's home, and she's like, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 times, maybe, so it was just like, just throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what sticks. But then she still has plausible deniability and protection from perjury because she also threw in a maybe. So I'm like, oh, well, you throw in a maybe, it was probably more than 4 times. And then later, David Warwick said he was in and out all the time. So he also couldn't be nailed down. And they could not be nailed down on any specifics of Sunday. And I'm going to take a deep dive into Sunday. But okay, let's continue.
First, it was Lori Vallow, Alex Cox, Melanie Gibb. And then Chad showed up later with the realtor.
Okay, so that's important. Store that piece of information away, that everyone was there first. Chad showed up later with a realtor. And let's keep going down this rabbit hole. Okay, so I question. Now, if given a choice between who's lying, David or Melanie, and again, let me just throw out, there's a possibility, remote as it may be, that Melanie forgot. I just have to throw that out there. But I don't believe that she forgot. I believe that this was intentional. Now, there is also the possibility that David is misremembering. I don't believe that because he seems to be recounting. So I started questioning, okay, well, let's start with what possible motivation might Melanie have to lie? Again, I'm not saying that she lied, all of the appropriate, caveats. But if she were to lie, what would possibly motivate her? And the thing that for me, that it came down to is it then begs the question, if Lori was on this little field trip they took, where was JJ? No one mentioned that JJ was on this field trip, and surely they both had the opportunity to mention that. So where was JJ? Who was watching JJ? And I just wonder if that's why, or, again, I don't want to accuse Melanie of lying. It could turn out to be like David misremembered. But if David is remembering accurately and Lori was on this outing, where was JJ? Possible explanations. We know that the babysitter didn't come out again. Could have possibly been hired another babysitter, although I'm pretty sure they probably would have issued a search warrant for those records. But it's a possibility. Possibly another family member was out at that time and watched JJ. There's still the mystery of who was in that Ring doorbell footage. The woman who was fascinated by the igloo, who just happened to sound like Lori, but we don't know who that person was. Maybe that person was there and was watching JJ, and everyone is just kind of dancing around that, or Lori drugged JJ to ensure that he would sleep, or JJ was already dead. So again, I'm gonna dive a little bit more, because this is what I have spent the last couple weeks digging into, is this question of Sunday, really just trying to decouple all of these facts and claims and figure out what happened to JJ. So Wood said, and this was to David Warwick, I don't recall if you've answered my last question. Over the weekend of September 20th through the 23rd, how many times did you see the defendant, Chad Daybell, at Lori's house? And he said once. And Wood Rob Wood said, okay, when was that? David said that would be Sunday, the 22nd. Oh, and I think I misspoke. I think I said Melanie said she saw Alex 2, 3, or 4 times. If I did, I meant Chad. And then we're going to cover that in the next one. Okay, so Rob Wood to Melanie. When were you at Lori Vallow's? Oh, when you were at Lori Vallow's house, did you ever have occasion to see Chad Daybell there? Yes. Rob Wood. Okay, do you recall approximately how many times you saw him there that weekend? Oh, this should have said Melanie, not Wood. 2, 3, 4 times, maybe. So once again, she's not being nailed down on how many times did you see Chad there. I don't believe that she's that fuzzy, but this is a consistent pattern with Melanie throughout her testimonies as well as her interviews. In fact, it got to the point where Pryor asked her when she interviewed with the FBI, and she was downright coy. She was just like, sometime in 2020. And that was really irritating to me because I'm just like, you know what? This is your time to shine. This is your time to do the right thing. You have a moral responsibility to sincerely testify. Sure, Pryor is annoying. Too bad. You got yourself in this position by being Lori's right-hand man, by being her enabler. Now you owe it to these victims. Like, I don't want to hear about your mighty change of heart. I want to see evidence of it. This is your opportunity to do the right thing, to exhibit the humility that you said that like God miraculously gave you in this experience that you had with him. That she wrote about that in her letter to eval members, and so it was just incredibly frustrating to, like when Pryor asked her about when she talked to the FBI, he had to treat her like a child and like go month by month, and he even at one point rolled his eyes, and I shared his frustration at this point. He was like, did you speak to them in July? How about June? And he just kind of went month by month. And I mean, it was unfruitful, but I think at that point, he was pretty fed up by like that, that was her jump the shark moment, in my opinion. Okay, so Rob Wood. Okay, so you don't recall an exact number. Melanie said, not an exact number, but I think every day. I think every day except for Monday. So that means that they are both corroborating that Chad was in Lori's apartment on Sunday. So let's dig into that. My big question, why? Why? And he just happens to look like Chad, but why? Why would Chad have had an occasion to be in Lori's apartment? And again, this is where there's all this like this cloud of mystery, because neither David nor Melanie could be tied down to just about anything. So I broke down what we know and what we don't know. What we know is that Chad didn't pick up Lori to take her to see the property because David said he came later with the realtor. So he wasn't there to pick up Lori. I'm just kind of like going step by step, through, okay, what happened that day. Also, they both testified that Chad wasn't at Lori's when they recorded the podcast. So they said that they went on this outing. Again, I do think it's suspicious that both Melanie and David said late morning to early afternoon. Could be coincidental, or it could be a sign that it's contrived, that they've synced up their testimonies. So we know that, and they also couldn't be nailed down on how long this outing was, where everyone went. We'll get to that in a minute. So we know Chad wasn't at Lori's for the podcast. David and Melanie both claimed they left late morning to early afternoon and recalled very little about the field trip. David said, after looking at the property, we all just went our different directions. So, he is, again, very vague. Everyone just kind of scattered and went in their different directions. Neither of them offered any kind of details like who exactly came to Lori's, where did other people go? So there are a lot of question marks. We also know that a picture was taken of JJ on Lori's couch sometime that day. We know that because Detective Hermosillo testified at Chad's hearing that a picture was found on Lori's iCloud account, and it was dated Sunday, September 22nd. Okay, so here's what we don't know. When was the picture of JJ taken that day? This is huge. Obviously, law enforcement knows this, but that to me is a really big deal. Also, was JJ wearing the red pajamas he was buried in that pic? Now, the reason I question that, where I'm going with that, is I question if Lori may have taken the picture of JJ in the morning in his pajamas. We know that he was buried in red pajamas. And if that picture was uploaded to iCloud, again, it's not a smoking gun, but it could be an indicator that JJ was killed in the morning. And he, that means everything else that, like all of these other sightings that they talked about later that evening, David's, account of a tender moment with Alex. Again, I'm not accusing, I'm just saying that if it comes out that JJ was in pajamas and no one can account for who was with JJ, then, there is the very real possibility that he was already dead when they went on their outing. So my other question, when was Chad at Lori's? And why was Chad at Lori's? At this point, I don't see any good reason for Chad to be at Lori's unless they met up early in the morning and went for, one of their walks around BYU, which, could be possible. But the fact that, JJ, apparently died on the 22nd or somewhere between the 22nd and the morning of the 23rd when Alex's phone pinged in Chad's backyard. There are a lot of really big question marks. And as I really dove into these questions, to me, the fact that Melanie and David, and this is where I'm looping David into this too, they're still enabling Lori. They're still covering, and it may be to save their own asses, but there is something that is very amiss. Like if they had nothing to do, and again, I'm not accusing them of being a part of, what happened to JJ, but if they knew nothing, they would have no reason to be so guarded, to be so, kind of opaque with their answers. I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 17 times maybe. Obviously, I'm exaggerating. Okay. And then why are Melanie and David's testimonies so vague about that day? That's a really big one for me, because I really went through their testimonies with a fine-tooth comb, trying to see if there were any details that they were specific on, even when it came down to, if David saw JJ, Rob Wood had to circle back on that. It was just kind of like this, and I thought at the time maybe he didn't hear Pryor's questions properly, and Pryor was playing games with the microphone, to be sure. So, that's a possibility. But I couldn't find any examples of them, if I had been, if I had overlapped, or even the overlaps that I had with Lori, because I have nothing to hide, and I'm not saying this in a self-congratulatory way, because I have nothing to hide, I have no problem being as specific as someone needs. You ask a question, and I've been very transparent about what I've known about Lori, some of the troubling signs that I've seen, because I don't have any reason to guard, except, there were a couple things just where it was okay, this is really hard to talk about it, but I thought it was important just for people to see, no, there were troubling signs back in 2018. But I just don't see that. I just don't see either Melanie or David at this point extricating themselves from this thing. I see like at the very end when it's like, okay, now here's an opportunity. They do have one final opportunity to do the right thing in the trial, and I hope that they will. But I didn't see that in these trials. I did think that David was more sincere in his testimony. He was less abrasive, you know, and less combative. You know, like even Melanie's little pissy comments about, you know, as I mentioned, or, you know, things like that. And, you know, she was combative with Pryor, and someone needs to coach her. She really needs to dial that back. That is not going to go over well with a jury. But at the same time, she doesn't need to, you know, have pure motives to be a significant asset to this case. And I do think that recording, I think the vast majority of that recording was total rubbish and her trying to save her temple recommend. I mean, here you have 2 missing kids, and I believe she knew that there were 2 missing kids, and they're going tit for tat over who is a core whore, you know, and, you know, who banged whom, and, you know, before they were married, and, you know, all of this stuff. Like, they're going at it over things that don't matter. Like, the only thing they should have been talking about is where's JJ, where's Tylee, you know, and stick to that instead of all of that other garbage. But there were 2 things in that recording that I think will be incredibly helpful that have, you know, nothing to do with like her character. So they're not going to be diminished in any way by her being shady in other ways. And personally, I think, again, you know, no legal training, this is just my opinion, but I think the fact that Chad was a total dumbass and contradicted his earlier testimony about Tammy, this time saying that he and Garth were there when Tammy died and the rest of the kids were there within 20 minutes. He had said before when she died that he woke up and she was dead, and he could tell she had been dead for hours. You know, so hopefully that detail will they'll use that detail to hang him or help hang him. And then also the fact that Lori said that basically not even Alex knew where JJ was. I think that's going to make it incredibly difficult for them to pin this whole thing on Alex. And so I do applaud Melanie for the recording. However, I think, you know, it just happened that that recording, which was to her benefit to record, is going to help this case. So I applaud her for that. But I'll close with this. My appeal, could we stop saying that Melanie was, quote, just naive? She was not just naive. Like, naive is someone getting an email about a Nigerian prince and sending them money. Like, that's naive. Melanie's involvement, again and again and again, her complicity, her enablement, those are not signs of naivete. In fact, at one point she even said, she referred to Chad and Lori's work as sloppy, which is like, you know, straight up gangsta right there, you know, like she's criticizing, yeah, it's sloppy. But anyway, so that concludes my presentation. You know, again, all of the caveats. I'm not out for blood. I know people will probably think that I'm out for blood. That's fine. I just feel like, you know, I'm just tired of hearing people say things like, you know, Melanie was just naive. I think that she played that role. And I think when she interviews with Nate Eaton, you know, she takes on a very different persona than the persona we see when she's under fire, like, you know, talking, like being interviewed by John Pryor, but even being questioned by Rob Wood. You know, she was a spitfire, even in answering some of her questions. Like, there was just this tone, like, you know, like this kind of abrasive tone. And then when Pryor asked about said something about her son, saying that JJ had been there, that's when you really saw just like a flash of anger. Now, I'm not saying I would do better in that situation. I'm just saying that, because I'm Irish AF, but so I'm not saying I would do any better. I'm just saying, like, yeah, it's tough, but this is your responsibility, but anyway, so, but you see this different persona when she's talking to Nate Eaton than even when she's talking to Keith. When she talks to Keith in the Dateline interview, she's not talking to someone who shares the same faith that I know of. If he's LDS, he's never come out as LDS, but she doesn't feel, it doesn't appear she feels the same safety. And so when she did that interview, I was just like, yeah, I think this is really more the real Melanie Gibb. Again, not that I question the sincerity of her faith. I do believe that Melanie, has a sincere faith. I do believe that she got pulled in, because of the wiles of a sociopath, of a psychopath, actually, so, and circling back to what I said earlier on, I do believe to some degree she is a victim in this story. You can be both victim and perpetrator or accomplice, or whatever you want to call it, enabler. We'll go with enabler. But I just do not believe that she was just naive. I also don't believe that that David Warwick set her straight. It wouldn't have taken 12 days, and she was at David Warwick's that whole time. I think they got scared. I think they found out the FBI was involved. And I think the bar was raised. But you don't see David like really raising the bar here. You don't see him like pushing her to do the right thing. They were both, I think, kind of freaking out for 12 days. And I also personally believe that the conversation between her and Lori and Chad was orchestrated. I think it was highly choreographed. I think that in the beginning, and so I personally believe that Melanie made an appeal to Lori, like, you owe this to me. You threw me under the bus, and now I'm, potentially legally liable, and I needed you to get me out. She may have threatened her. So the first part of the conversation is like ridiculously just cloying saccharine, hello, sweet Melanie. Melanie assumes that Lori is already on the phone, that he's on speaker. She calls Chad, even though she was close with Lori, not with Chad. All of these different things where I think it went south. So I think that Lori and Chad agreed to do this to help her out. Also, the questions she asked about JJ and like, oh, well, Melanie actually suggests, do you think Kay was trying to kidnap him? Well, how would Kay kidnap a child who you said that Lori said she gave JJ over to? So like there were just a lot of things that were really incongruent. They didn't make sense. But I think where the conversation went south and what Lori didn't agree to, again, totally my opinion. We are in conjecture land here. But it is, I don't think Lori agreed to be rebuked by Melanie. So as soon as Melanie asked to share a scripture, you can hear the hackles go up. And in fact, Lori, she was like, sure, honey, but then she beats her to the punch and she starts preaching at Melanie because, there just seems to be like this, well, not seems to be. I mean, she pushed back and then they start going at it. When I think another telltale sign was when Lori said, I don't know if you're recording this call for the police or what. Well, of course she was recording the call for the police. I mean, it was so obviously like it was contrived from the beginning. There was no like build up or whatever. It just like jumped right into like, hey, you said this about JJ, clearly documenting, what she had said and stuff. But anyway, so I think that Lori did not agree to be, in any way, corrected by Melanie.
I think, saw herself as superior to Melanie. She and Chad were the leaders of the 144,000. There was no mention of Melanie even being like, you know, second in command with David. That was just my conjecture. And so that's when things just really went south. But anyway, so I just saw, yeah, enough said. That's my analysis on Melanie Gibb. So I will spend a few minutes just doing Q&A. It's pretty late. I did at least sit down for this one. But anyway, if you have questions, I'm going to try to get to a few of them. Just put them in all caps so I can see them. If you ask questions earlier in the chat, every once in a while, like if a longer video was playing, I kind of peeked in there, but I didn't see, you know, I only saw like a couple questions. So if you have any questions, put them in all caps. I'll probably spend about 15 minutes. And again, I just want to thank you for coming to the live and for, you know, joining me on these, you know, deep dives. I know that I don't do very many. I haven't done very many videos, and when I've done them, I've taken very deep dives. And this is kind of why I haven't been able to do very many videos, because for each one, I really dive deep into the minutia. But I just want to thank everyone for joining me on this adventure. The many kind words through, you know, YouTube comments, you know, Facebook. I'm very appreciative of it. And I will actually miss the true crime community, because it's been an amazing community by and large. But again, thank you for joining me on the adventure. And if you don't hang out for the Q&A, you know, maybe we will sync back up when the trial is underway. Okay. All right. Thanks, Terry. Let me pull up the questions here. Thanks, Janice. Okay. Wish someone would do this sort of thing. Oh, I know. Okay. D. Sabo said, I wish someone would do this sort of thing regarding Melanie Pulowski. See, now I had hoped to get to Melanie Pulowski, but then this recording surfaced with Lori Starrett against my brother, and that just threw me into, you know, a pretty intense schedule of interviewing and things like that. So I wasn't able to get to Melanie. I'm sure she will be very happy about that. Okay, what else? Why are Chad's adult children not being looked at? They had to know a bunch of this. Stephanie Bailey, that is a very good question. So I see Chad's children, by and large, victims in this. You know, they didn't choose this life. They didn't choose this, you know, negative press. Joseph and Emma aside, I just don't even have time for that clown car. They have been absolutely disrespectful of the process, just mocking it, being passive aggressive, you know, signs of hiding in true sight. Yeah, I mean, hiding in plain sight. I mean, you know, just different ridiculous things. But you know, it's not. It doesn't move this ball downfield for me. So I do think that with time and maturity, I think they'll probably look back on this and, well, one, they will need help. I really hope they get help, because you see that they, you know, have a strong loyalty for Chad, Emma, because he's her dad, and Joseph, because, I don't know, he's Joseph. But But I do think with time, this will be something that they will most likely regret, because, things said and done on the internet, they don't go away. So, Emma sticking her tongue out at reporters, that's not going to go away. And unfortunately, it's going to impact her kids, and her child if they don't have more kids. But, so I think they're going to be dealing with some of the consequences of really bad choices for some time to come. My biggest issue with the adult Daybell kids, there were no minors through this, is that from what I can tell, they were all at that house at some point after the kids went missing, and after it actually became public that the kids were missing and their dad was a person of interest. And so for me, this really bothered me a lot when we actually saw dad was a person of interest. Okay. Yeah, I was trying to get to the comments. All right, that's not gonna work. I'll just have to look at my other laptop. So yeah, when we actually saw how big their burial sites were, it really bothered me to know that they had all been in their home, and some of them were living in the home. And when I believe it was Detective Hermosillo described the site that JJ was buried in, I think the dimensions he gave were 4 feet by 2 feet. So and he was approximating, but I mean, that's a pretty big, area of recently upturned earth. And even when they went in June, they could Detective Hermosillo, again, I'm pretty sure it was Hermosillo, talked about the weed growth being uneven, and so where JJ was buried, the weeds were shorter and they were a different, type of grass. So they could tell that it looked different from the land all around it. And that to me was somewhat shocking, just because I'm like, how lazy was Chad? Like you buried a child in this area and you were too lazy to even regularly mow that area so that at least the weed growth was equal. But I imagine grass, would grow at a slower rate than weeds, so he would have had to stay on top of it. And apparently he didn't. But, you had 2 areas of recently upturned earth, grass that was a different pattern, knowing all the while that your dad was a person of interest, and these 2 kids were missing for months. So I understand that they were loyal to their dad, but there's just no way that, that they didn't talk. I just can't see any possibility that these kids just didn't go out into the backyard, didn't notice that, there were these 2 areas of, one area of recently upturned earth, not recently, but, it was, you could still see even when they raided the home, I think it was June 9th, that it was different. It looked different. But yeah, and then even Chad's story of seeing a raccoon, and he shoots a raccoon and then buries it in the pet graveyard. Was that something that he normally did? Only his kids would know. It seems kind of weird that you would bury a rodent. And someone had come forward once and said, that raccoons were especially problematic for Tammy because I think they killed a rabbit of hers or something. They killed something. And so it's just kind of weird. You say that you shot a raccoon, and then instead of throwing it in a couple bags and throwing it in the garbage, you buried it. If that was normal, if they
found other rodents in there, it might make sense, but it doesn't make sense to me. So that's the one sticking point for me, where I'm just like, you know, how long would you guys have allowed families to just twist in the wind, wondering if these kids were ever going to be found? Cynthia, thank you. Thank you. She just wrote nice things. Okay. Karen Manna asked, will I be in Idaho for the trial? Yes, I am definitely planning to be there for the trial. I don't know how long the trial is going to go. So I don't have like unlimited time. Like I said earlier, you know, if this is going to be like a 5-week trial, I'm not going to be able to take off 5 weeks. I'm not independently wealthy. But yeah, I am going to do everything in my power to make as much of the trial as possible. It is definitely very, very important to me, because if the trial is anything like the hearing, there were details that we couldn't see, like we couldn't see the exhibits and stuff. And I definitely, you know, it's going to be a heavy lift, but I do want to know. Knowing is better than not knowing. Okay. Oh, Sharon Alexander asked, why do you think that JJ wouldn't interact with Melanie or David? So, okay, well, so one piece that was different for them than for me, or at least for David. So David said that he didn't meet JJ until September. So JJ would have been off his meds for months. So there is that difference, but even with JJ on his meds and therapy, and he had these iPad apps that would help him, you know, kind of recalibrate when he would start to get upset and stuff. He, like, you didn't just come into, this is my experience. And some of this may have been my personality. So even with Tylee, like I didn't bust up in her life like, hey, Tylee, I'm your long lost aunt. You know, I was very careful and just kind of was there and, you know, would like joke around with her and, you know, was just trying to find common ground with her. And then, you know, it paid off in spades the last night that I was there, and I've talked about that before. I'm not going to talk about it here because it's the first one I've gotten through without crying. But with JJ, it was even more so that way. Like when I was hanging out there, I would just sit down with him while he was playing, and he would be talking about, you know, what he was doing, because he was like, you know, in his like imaginary world, like a typical child, you know, just like, you know, crashing into things with cars and stuff like that. And, you know, he was just absolutely adorable. So I would like play with him, but it was kind of like, I felt like I was like in a parallel universe with him. Like I didn't know if I was connecting with him. I really just enjoyed being with him. And you know, aside from being absolutely adorable, he was just fascinating to me because, you know, I was like, you know, part of me was like, wow, you know, like, is this what we would be like if we didn't have all of these like different walls that we learned to, you know, put up as adults and even kids, you know, you get hurt enough and so, and JJ, you know, a function of his quote disability, which I think was actually, this part was actually really awesome, is that he didn't have that. And so he lived like so like truly, and I'm not trying to wax eloquent or anything, but so that to me, it was fascinating to be with him because there was like no dissimulation about him, you know? And so, you know, you just kind of like existed in JJ's world, but I didn't know, I didn't really know if I was connecting with him, except the first time I don't think this happened the first night I was there. I think it started the second night I was there, if I remember correctly. But I would hear him ask Lori when she would tell him, okay, you know, it's time for bed. He would ask each night, is Annie going to be here when I wake up? And I was just like, oh, we are connecting, you know, but it wasn't like apparent when I was just like hanging out with him and playing with him and, you know, crashing into his car with an ambulance, you know, for irony or whatever, you know. And so, and then there was one day, and this is the honest to God truth, not that I would lie about something like this, but I was in the kitchen with Lori, and JJ was running his circuits, and he went on a detour, which was pretty rare for JJ unless he was hungry. Like, he wanted a yogurt. He really loved yogurt. And he ran into the kitchen, but he didn't stop at the refrigerator. He ran up to me and gave me this hug, this huge hug, and then just ran off. And I remember joking with Lori. I was like, I think I just, was that a drive-by hugging, you know? And it was just like, it was definitely like one of those cringe moments where, like, you know, it felt like my heart grew 2 sizes that day. Cause it was just like, that was the moment that I was like, what do you know? Yeah, I connected with him, you know? So if they just, like, I know David said he tried to talk to him, but he said something to the effect of, like, JJ acted like he wasn't there or something. I can understand how David would have that impression. But from my understanding, both he and Melanie have a child with autism. Like, both of them have kids who have autism. I know that David, he referenced having a special needs child, and then someone, I think in the True Crime Underground group, said that this child was autistic. I don't know that firsthand, so always trying to put out these caveats. So I think that he has a child who has autism. We know that, you know, from what he shared, that the child had special needs because he had a weird vision about this child. But so, you know, if that's true, like, they should be somewhat familiar. Again, I don't know, you know, their kids' autism. Again, if David's child has autism, you know, it might present differently. But, you know, I mean, even kids who aren't on the spectrum, like Tylee, you entered Tylee's world, and Tylee took a lot more to trust someone than even JJ, in my opinion. But, you know, I think in their case, I think, you know, they were there to be with Lori and Chad. And so I'm just not sure that they were really that, you know, like, it would have been important to their purpose in being together to connect with JJ. So, okay. Thank you. Miss Frenchen, that's cute. Yeah, I haven't seen that interview with Dr. Oz. I can't watch my own interviews, but thank you. They sent me a quick clip, and I was like, oh my gosh, I look so tired. Okay, but thank you. What do you think about other YouTube coverage? Oh, you know, here's another weird thing. So I was really big on true crime before it landed, you know, in my airspace. And so now I can't watch true crime. I can't even watch other videos about the case. And I don't really understand it, because I definitely want the information, but you know, I've seen from what I've seen, you know, every once in a while I'll watch like a little bit of one, and I really just do not understand why I can't watch them, because I consume, you know, like I literally have been watching like the interviews from the hearings on repeat. So it's not like it's the content that bothers me. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but from what I've seen, it's been it's been really excellent. I really early on, and this may have contributed to why I became cautious about watching some of these YouTube channels. Early on, like the YouTubers I watched were very loose with facts. Like I was just about everyone's sister. And, you know, having been a reporter, it really bothered me. Like that, you know, people were getting even some of the basic details wrong. And so that may have contributed to, like, I was just getting so angry, like, and then also, you know, like one thing that I found out in following the case on social media, and this has really been a source of frustration for me, is that someone will start a rumor because, you know, there are sociopaths following this case. And so someone will start a rumor, and there was a really cruel rumor that was started about Tylee. I'm not even going to repeat it, but they'll state it as fact. Like they won't, you know, they won't cite their sources, and they'll just state it as fact. And so I would be like the junkyard dog saying, you know, like, where, like, cite your sources. Where did you find this? Give me a link, because, you know, if it bore out and it was a credible source, fine. But that, so then what would happen, it was like whisper down the lane, like someone else would then restate it as fact. And then people would be responding to these facts that no one was citing sources. And so I was pretty consistently, especially probably like the first 4 months or so, you know, just like, it was like whack-a-mole. This thing, nope, that's total rubbish. Like, you know, people like stating facts about Joe and about like his life insurance that I didn't even know. And the FBI didn't know, because I had an extended conversation with an FBI agent in Phoenix, and they didn't know, but the agent said that they would find out. So I'm just like, this is ridiculous. So that may have contributed to it. But yeah, but for the most part, you know, like the ones I've watched have been excellent. Yeah. Okay, so Ordinary asked me why I'm leaving the true crime community after tonight. So that's kind of hard to answer. I mean, I think, one, I promised myself, so that's not hard. Although when I promised myself that I would step back, it was really more from like, you know, doing like these deep dives, doing the you know, the lives, interviews, things like that. I just wanted to give myself a breather. But then, you know, at this point, the case has been in a lull. So in the absence of like any kind of breaking news, you know, like the true crime community, it becomes, you know, a little divergent. You know, it's like posts about monoliths in the desert. And I mean, no disrespect to these groups. They have to keep the group alive, and they're going to have to keep these groups alive for a long time before the trial comes up. And, you know, it's already set for July 2021. But, you know, if murder charges are introduced, there's a very real possibility it could be pushed back even more. So, you know, these groups will have to figure out how to kind of keep going. And I think people just enjoy being part of the community. I know I certainly did and have enjoyed it. But for me, just given my proclivities, I just came to a point where I was just like, as long as I'm in, I'm going to keep taking deep dives. And if someone shares something that's wrong, you know, I'm going to feel compelled to, you know, like go to the timeline, go to the dashboards and do research and stuff. And so I really, just for my own outlook, I need to be able to give myself permission to just kind of move on and shift my focus, you know, to like more positive things, you know, because when the trial comes, it's going to be, you know, a heaping pile of negative. And so I don't want, at this point, like I said earlier on, you know, I'm leaving in a good place. I'm not having nightmares. I'm happy. I still obviously feel grieved about what had happened, but it's not like that, you know, kind of dark cloud that I had for a while. But yeah, so it's just really for my own mental health and to try to maintain this outlook, and also to do other things, like, you know, like, but spending this much time on the case means that there are things that I really needed to be doing that I haven't been doing, that I need to get back to doing, like blogging about data. Am I doing any more lives with other YouTubers? No. Oh, well, I have 2 more interviews that I'm going to be doing between now and the end of the year, which is part of the reason I just didn't feel like I could squeeze in another live. But, and then I don't know when those will air, sometime probably in 2021, late 2020, I'm not sure. But yeah, so I'll jump off the merry-go-round after those. And hey, Sarah. That was my friend Sarah Cassidy who asked that question. Do you suppose Alex was murdered? Absolutely, 100%. So they could blame it on him. Yeah. Yeah, there is just no question in my mind. He was murdered. That doesn't mean he was murdered. And just that there's nothing else that points to, you know, you just can't have this many natural deaths in a very unnatural timeline. But, and then also, I think one, he definitely knew too much. It's hard enough to have as many people as they have who know details, because, you know, at any point, you know, law enforcement could put pressure on one of them, they buckle, start talking, and there's going to be drama. You know, it's going to be an arms race to a deal, if even, you know, law enforcement or the prosecutor's office even has any incentive to offer a deal. You know, there's a very good chance that they have so much on these people, there will be no reason to offer them a deal. If the death penalty is put on the table, I think that could, you know, like if everyone holds firm until then, I think that could be a motivating factor. If I had my druthers, Lori would be the one to flip, because, you know, she takes no prisoners, and I want to know the truth. And so yeah, I think one, they wanted to be able to pin it on him, but then also I think that there is a possibility, you know, they did kind of act as like some kind of, you know, makeshift Mormon mafia. And so when Melanie told Lori about, you know, Alex saying, you don't want to know, I think to Lori, I think that there's a very good chance that that was, that came across as disloyalty and a proclivity to talk. And then, you know, I just don't believe, I have a pretty low threshold for coincidences, especially, you know, like I said, with this clown car. So the fact that, you know, he up and died the day after Tammy's remains were exhumed. Yeah. I also have a bad feeling about the neighbor who would reportedly walk along Chad's, the creek along his property. You know, I hope that they investigate that, you know, because he also died suddenly, and we just don't know if he walked along Chad's property every morning and he just happened to walk past when Chad was, because I think he died, it was like within, I forget the date, but I think it was within days of JJ being buried. And so I think it was under a week maybe, but yeah, so yeah, there are too many unexplained deaths. Thank you for covering duping to light. Yeah, that smirk, snafu 2020. Yeah, it's bothered me too. It's just grossly inappropriate. And that's another thing with Melanie is that, you know, through all these interviews, through her testimonies, the only time I've seen her even come close to like buckling emotionally is when she's talking about Lori's suffering. You know, and I've studied her pretty closely. I mean, someone can let me know in a comment if they saw her express emotion and I missed it because, like I said, I want to be fair, but I just haven't seen it. And, you know, and then when she talks about Lori, you know, not being able to look pretty and have nice things. And another time in that same interview, she talked about how, you know, she's not going to be with Chad, who she loves. And, you know, I'm just like, who cares? Like, that's called punishment. It's not supposed to be fun, you know? And so, yeah, it's, you know, that in and of itself would be off, but then those instances of duping to light, and even in videos that I played after that, there were still, you know, again, like, you know, maybe if she were on the spectrum and, you know, like that can cause, you know, some unusual affect. But the majority of her interviews, she, you know, she holds it together. It's really just when she's talking about like the deaths, it's just almost like she can't contain that, you know, I don't know if it's adrenaline or what it is, but it's like the thing that would cause most people to kind of wither, and it would be painful to recount these things. She seems to come alive, and her personality is, you know, pretty easygoing. So she becomes more animated when she talks about those things. So yeah, no me gusta. Did Alex die before Melanie came clean? No, he died after. So he died, I think it was December 19th, maybe. And she came clean December, what was it? December 8th. Oh, well, that's what I believe. I mean, she said, you know, she gave us a range between the 6th and the 8th. Another time she said the 7th and 8th. But, you know, like I said earlier, I don't really see her reaching out to Detective Pillar until she had something to offer. And she did say that part of the reason for making the recording was to show that she was innocent. Do you think you will be involved in the trial? Like, if you mean called as a witness, no. If Arizona actually investigated my brother's death and brought charges, possibly, but not with the kids or Tammy. I'm way too tangentially connected. But do appreciate that. You need to move on. Thank you. Doesn't Melanie still maintain Lori was misled by the dark devil interview with Nate? Yeah, and that's one of the things, you know, that I touched on it a little bit in the live, but you just don't see Melanie taking responsibility or holding Lori and Chad, holding their feet to the flames in their involvement in all of this. So even when she talks, when like Rob Wood asked her why she lied, you know, she focused on, well, because, you know, Lori deceived me, you know, and she kind of sounds like Eve in the garden, but yeah, so yeah. And I mean, how would you answer a question like that? Well, I lied because, you know, the truth would be damning. You know what I mean? Like, well, you know, what else is she really going to say? But you just don't you don't see, the only one who I think or I'll say the one I think she holds the most responsible is Chad. And in fact, I forget, there was one video that I shared in this live that, or maybe a couple, there were a couple different times where she really seems to kind of chuck Chad under the bus more so than Lori. Like even when she talks about like, well, Lori didn't know, so she went back to Chad. And when she said, Lori was in reference to Chad wanting Lori to move to Rexburg, and how, Lori was uncomfortable with it, or, something like that. But Chad said, blah, 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 so it's pretty subliminal, but it does seem, at least my perspective is that the only one she kind of, holds accountable is Chad, or that, she'll toss things over the fence to Chad to, for the most part, shield Lori. Okay, I'm going to take 2 more questions and then I'm going to have to bounce. Okay. Yeah, so Lori Colley, I don't know if you're still here. You said what scares me the most is there is not more charges. Yeah, so I can honestly say, and I don't hold back in talking about law enforcement. I've been an open critic of all 3 Arizona departments. I could not be more underwhelmed with them. And I will be pleasantly surprised if any justice comes from their departments. But with Idaho, I not only believe that there will be charges, and I'm not an optimist, I'm also not a pessimist. I'm actually a realist. Like I really do. I think it's pretty well proven. I look at data, I look at facts. But when I look at, like, even just digging into the Sunday issue, I mean, I didn't start picking up on some of these details until I really, really dug in. And part of the reason I could do that is that, is that I have this dashboard. And so, I can do searches for specific terms and stuff, but I have a tiny fraction of what law enforcement has at their disposal. And so I'm not a betting person, but if I were, I would put everything I own on the fact that I think they're holding back. And I personally hope that Rexburg Police Department and, any other agencies involved will hold back until the very last minute and give the defense, just like whatever they're absolutely owed to up the charges. And I think that's going to happen. I don't know that they'll wait till the 11th hour, but they don't have any incentive to up the charges to murder right now. That's just going to give the defense more time to plan their defense. So I am actually, I just feel really, really confident that murder charges or accessory to commit murder charges, much more serious charges will come into play. And I actually think that there's a very good chance the death penalty could be on the table. I'm also glad that Idaho doesn't have an insanity defense. So on that note, thank you again for joining me, and until the trial. All right, good night, guys.